again. I don't have a good way to put that right now. But it's fine. Kiwi, get out of the sink, cat.
Wait, do I have two of these open? Uh-oh. What is happening here? I think I have two of these open by accident. Okay. I had like two OBS open. That would have been not good for my computer. It would have definitely exploded.
Awesome. Kyle's
Okay, so
yes. 19. Okay, so I'm gonna give him these roles: neighbor and Generation K.
Yay.
Applicant. Then okay. Then I'll tell.
Alrighty. Okay, we're starting this up. All right, I want to give. So am I started on everything? I am. Yeah, we're everywhere now. Okay, I think. Wait, are we on this one too? Yes, we are. Okay. So just as a heads up, I'm feeling a little funky because I am pretty sure I have lupus. I've talked about this in the past. And I think I'm flaring. And it sucks. And it's fucking scary. And I need to go figure out the doctor because the new doctor was still going to have me go to the same rheumatologist that saw me originally. And that rheumatologist has horrible reviews on Yelp. The one woman that I was going to go see didn't have horrible reviews, but completely forgot what symptoms I said I had on my second, visit with her, and didn't have all of the blood work back. So she just kind of speculated on symptoms that I wasn't as concerned about. Like she's like, you just have like dermatological symptoms or skin stuff. I was like, no. So it was really bad because she definitely forgot who I was and minimized what I was saying was going on. And then she immediately left, sending an email that she was going to start a concierge service where you would subscribe for $1,000 a month to get to still be her patient. And I was like, nope, I'm not going to fucking do that, as if I could afford it. Anyway, so that's what happened when I tried to see a rheumatologist, even though I've had elevated ANA possibly for a long time now, but definitely every time they test it. And I have shit going wrong. And my joints were like on fire last night. Both my hip joints felt like exceptionally warm and to the point where it was painful, and my knees as well. So that's fucking bad. And also, yeah, so I have joint shit finally, and they'll probably diagnose me now that I have joint shit. Yay! But it took getting to that point, and I'm really sad, and I am sad that I have something like this. So that's where my mental state is at today, is just the surrealness of like, I definitely am going to be one of those stories of like, then they finally figured out you have an autoimmune disease, and I'm upset. And also I'm upset that autism can get you labeled as a hypochondriac so young. That has not helped anything. And also the way that like doctors are treating people based on demographic shit that we have no control over, not great. So yeah, so I'm in that headspace, and it doesn't feel good. So I'm very tired, and I'm realizing that I'm probably very tired because I have lupus. Instead of trying to mask it with coffee, which I can't have because it gives me instant migraines. So yay. So I'm sad, and I'm sad that other people don't have to deal with this, and everything is built around me trying to forget this is happening if the flare goes down. Yep. And I feel betrayed. So,
oh gosh.
And yeah.
I was just thinking about how like doctors should actively have anti-bias training that they keep up to keep their license.
Yeah.
Because I just noted like the way you talk is just perky. So like the fact that you're going through this right now is not communicated by your voice, and there are far too many of the doctors that are in the system will take that as evidence towards you not having the thing that you have.
Right. Exactly. Like I have to actively like, be having the symptoms in front of their face.
Right. And the symptoms have to be the ones that they think. Like you have to be presenting the symptoms in the way they expect for you to be doing the thing.
Yes.
Like,
hey, Lilith.
Yeah.
So the problem, so they do have mild amounts of, psychology related requirements for med school stuff now. But if
Mhm.
you have doctors that are anywhere near older, they had 0.
Yeah.
So while there
Mm.
are minor changes, they are not major enough to make big of enough of
Mhm.
a difference,
Yeah.
Yeah.
just in general.
Yeah. Well, and so for example, I'll give you an example. Like I have a rash that I've just called splotchiness because it started probably around puberty where I think this stuff kicked off. So
Mhm.
my neck, all the way up my cheeks, kind of like coming up off my jaw, and all the way down my chest, looks like a map of countries. Like it's crazy. It's like and it's very bright red, and it'll happen under stress. And if showers are too hot, my legs will also do it, and it looks absolutely insane. I was on a call with the neurologist who's been trying to figure out the migraine. By the way, most of the migraine medications are flaring this undiagnosed autoimmune disease. So like one of them, I could no longer close my hands in the morning because all of the joints had seized up basically and locked. And it hurt to try to move them. And then I developed a trigger finger, so one of my fingers would snap open when I tried it. It was very bad. So, and my right hand still gets a little sore. Anyways, so the migraine medications have created problems. One of them, I think, is I've had a heart monitor on last week because now when I wake up from naps, the whole right side of my body feels like it's an uneven washing machine for like 30 minutes or 30 minutes, 30 seconds to a minute or even a little more. And nobody knows what that is. So we have to check it with my fucking heart. Yay, because it feels like it's my pulse going crazy. So I may have developed like AFib or something. Anyways, good times. So all that's happened. But all that to say, I'm trying to report those. But what she saw was the rash during an
Right.
appointment. She's like, what is that? Or I've gone to urgent care and the rash is there. Like, why do you have a rash? I'm like, oh, that's a rash? I thought I'm just splotchy. Tee hee. But like, I've had doctors
Mhm.
now look at that and go, that's wrong. I'm like, oh, well, guess what? Like,
Yeah.
um, so I'm like somewhere in the less obvious symptoms range, I guess, until somebody sees them and then they're like, oh, well, that seems totally wrong. I'm like, I know, doesn't it? But it's not perfectly lining up, I guess, with a presentation that people are like, well, I'm going to call that you should. I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going wrong. I feel like I haven't seen the right rheumatologist. I've only seen one, and that if I don't go to the right rheumatologist, they're not going to understand what's happening to me because
Mhm.
I'm being categorized as like I must be fine, and I don't even know it's a symptom anymore because this has been going on for like almost all of my life since I was like in
Right.
middle school.
That you're being categorized as I must be fine. That's really good framing or phrasing for people to be aware of. Because like I was thinking about the levels of autism that we're diagnosed with, right? Level 1, 2, and 3, and how
Yeah.
like that's how much support that they assign to us. And
Yes.
just like basically, I think like if that's how that works, then we should add one value to each of those. Like level 1 should be called level 2 because we're not getting
Hmm.
given enough support, right? Because they're
Right.
like, oh, you look to me like a person who doesn't need support anymore because you don't need
Right.
support in communicating to me, right?
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
like, and that's just wrong. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the definition of support isn't there. I'm definitely having a hard time with this because I don't want to present myself to be
Hmm.
assessed by doctors because it's not that they come and look at me as crazy per se, but like I now have my medical records, right? And they make observational
Hmm.
notes about like your kind of like disposition overall. And
Hmm.
it's just like pleasant woman. Healthy, pleasant woman. So I'm like, that's cool, I guess. Like, I'm not saying that I don't take care of my health and I'm thin and I've worked out a lot because I was a ballet dancer. So, like, all of that's fine. I don't know what they're expecting it to look like for me to have something that's abnormal that should have attention paid to it. It's just like healthy is such a weird thing to
Yeah,
say. You like they literally say she looks
right.
healthy.
And they
I
should
Cool.
get
be
those too, by the way.
right. And they should be the one group of people who doesn't make that conflation mistake of like
Yeah.
looking healthy doesn't mean healthy. And yet they are not actually trained out of doing that,
Right.
which is
Exactly.
horrible.
It's alarming. Well, and so I work with,
Yes.
so I've worked for a year working with people's bodies, right? And the thing about it is I have people who have like what's the word, like connective tissue disorders and autoimmune disorders. And like literally, if you move their body, the tissue feels different. So like I'm like it's very fucking obvious to me who has an autoimmune disease just touching them at this point. Like, and I can feel, that's why I was like, oh man, I know somebody who has an autoimmune disease that like when it's flaring, her knees are hot to the touch. Like her joints, you can literally feel it. And I'm like, okay, cool. I kind of knew that intellectually because I've read a little bit, but once you actually get your hands on it, I will never forget that ever. So I'm like, what the fuck are you guys doing? If you're ever like, that seems good. Like even somebody, if they test my joints, they should figure out that I have fucking hip dysplasia because like my shit doesn't feel normal. Like I don't understand how you could manipulate a body. And I figured this out better than them because I studied contortion. Like contortion wasn't supposed to teach me how to identify people with soft connective tissue disorders, but it
Right.
fucking did. Like I know what
Right.
EDS feels like. I know
Well, right.
I'm like,
And
yeah,
so
go
this
ahead.
is the problem that is actually highlighted in the preamble to the original copy of the feminine character, with the
Mm-hmm.
way that science has been trending towards further specialization and alienation between the specialists. Right. And so our culture as a whole values specialization more than other things because that's what works well for capitalism to profit from.
Yes.
And and so doctors are one of the more prestigious specialists in our society. And this means that they tend to be less well-rounded people who have less of the supporting skills that would make their main specialization work better if they had
Mm-hmm.
them.
They need
Right?
them. They're doing the wrong things with their training. Like if I'm being really
Yeah.
honest, and they're also trying to get people who are going to be like, yay, toys for this ridiculous salary. But also, a lot of them at this point
Yep.
aren't even getting to do that. But that's the people they were attracting at first. Now those people are in debt too. So I understand they're stressed out. But they're stressed out people that were motivated by extrinsic external rewards. And like that's our society. It's like, oh, doctor is like a good title. I don't give a fuck about your title. Are you going to
Yeah.
recognize when somebody has the disease that you're supposed to be a specialist in or not? And anyways, I'm ranting, but like this has
Yeah.
been awful. Like it's
Yeah.
lifelong, and I have to walk around where like you I get called precocious. We get called precocious when you're younger, and then when you're
Right.
trying to like as an adult say like, well, apparently I started thinking about things a little bit early, and here we have opportunities in our lives that we've grabbed onto to develop ourselves, and then I get infantilized at the end of that. I'm like, okay, this sucks. Like, when do I get to tell people I have observations and they're good? These observations freaking matter. And this is not, I keep talking to Kyle. At this point
Right.
he's exasperated. Like, this is not normal, right? This is not normal, right? And that you just can't do that forever. You can't just be like asking if everything is abnormal when yes, it's abnormal. Anyways, that's I don't want to get too much in my health stuff, but like
Yeah.
I'm
And
I'm yeah, I'm go ahead.
when you came in and when you started, it sounded like you were going to very quickly reference your health situation to make a
Mhm.
broader point about
Yes.
where you are today or wanted to do today or something.
Yes. And the broader point too is that so I need the discriminatory attitudes towards people who are on the spectrum to be confronted directly. And I need that to be normal because I need to confront doctors with it. And I need to be like, I'm not accusing them of being a bad person, but I'm going to say like, hey, so that this doesn't become a problem when I'm much older, that is much more severe, and I'm still going to be autistic. can we handle this right this second? Can you give me a battery of tests that you wouldn't normally give to people? Because the problem is we have overlap with conditions that are also kind of out there in way higher percentages, and we still don't know why. And there's no reason for us to have a poor quality of life long term, because people are misunderstanding how to categorize us, because the first categorization failed. Like, as soon as we walk in, they're like, oh, I might like or dislike this quirky person, but I'm going to acknowledge they're quirky without talking about it because it's embarrassing for people to be quirky. That's what gets me. That's what sends me, is like, I know I'm weird. The weirdness is not a mistake, and the weirdness is not something I need people to obfuscate and on my behalf erase so that they can pretend any of this makes sense. I don't make sense. My body doesn't make sense. I need to just not make sense, and then people to do more work to try to understand me. Not to say, oh, I don't understand why you're weird, I'm going to pretend you're not weird, because when you get in a medical environment, this is going horribly.
Yeah, and I think to achieve that kind of change, the most likely useful venue would be a broader cultural shift towards not just like knowledge of the growth mindset, but towards investment in learning and training in general throughout society. Right. So like, not just like putting money on teachers and more money to doctors, not to reward them, but like spent on training them, spent on giving them more time to be learning. Or right, like if the doctor makes the same amount of money but works half as many days and spends the other half learning, and then we pay 2 doctors for every doctor we have now, kind of thing. Right.
By hijacking the wallets of people that already stole from us and taxing the crap out of them.
Right. And then I'm like, as far as I can tell, the way that kind of movement is started is by TikTok people. Like become a TikTok person more actively and talk about your experience and what people can do in their lives to lead us towards changing that. Right. Which starts with their own personal attitudes, but also spreading those attitudes to everyone they know. Because the attitudes are simultaneously good in your own life, that will be good in the public sphere. Because we need to reorient ourselves as pro-social human beings. Because our society is not made for humans.
No, it's not. Exactly. And the doctors, there's a fun fact that I learned. They changed the maximum number of hours they could work down a bit, because the way that they were going, they were getting in car crashes on the way home because they were falling asleep at the wheel. There's doctors who are practically falling asleep, like nodding off during surgeries.
Yeah.
That's really happening. So like, bro, like, so it's not made for humans. Not Jamie likes saying, like, it's not made for autistics. It's not made for human beings. We happen to be human beings, which is one of the reasons it's not for us either.
And that's why I said it as like the best avenue for change, but I also meant kind of like a required prerequisite to get our needs met is going to be getting everyone else's needs met better than they are, because everyone is on fire on purpose. Because when we're all on fire, nobody could stop to help each other. They have to just keep working at their job that gets them money to purchase, 5 hours of Fire Be Gone before they catch on fire.
Fire Be Gone. Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And actually, I just started watching the musical Urinetown, which is kind of the same thing, where people have to come up with money to go to the bathroom every day, as sort of like a ridiculization of the thing that is real. Is that every day everyone has to earn enough money to not die. Because in Urinetown, it turns out they're just killing anybody who pees in public. And that's just how capitalism works. Is they're just killing anybody who doesn't work a job. They kill you by pushing you to the margins until you die. And that's bad and not good.
That's bad. It's bad for the collective psychology of everyone, because you cannot be surrounded by that and fight the cognitive dissonance forever. You either have to address it and get angry, and also be able to say that like the people that are okay with this, that are setting it up, are really disturbed and should actually be like studied in a special place where they don't have power, like the inverse of where they should be, which is probably why they're trying to be there, because maybe on some level they know that they're deeply disturbed, and that like in a fair society we'd have to study them, like, and figure out what the like, you know what I mean? You'd have to contain them. You'd have to detect and contain them early, and we're not. And that's not. And then there's that stupid movie, The Minority Report. God damn that stupid movie. It was probably made by one of these psychopaths, but like we have I don't want to get too much in that. Okay, but like, damn it. Like this is so aggravating, right? Because
so yeah. I came in and I asked you, like, you were talking about your medical situation for a reason to set up our conversation today.
Okay. Let me so yeah. I am going to have to work on my stress levels, is what I want to get to. And this gets into what Kyle suggested as a topic, where like, what are little things we can do that are going to make our body budget, like our metabolic drain, less? Like, how can we use anything to reduce stress? Like, I obviously am really liking these noise canceling headphones. I'm currently wearing them. They're great. But as many things as possible so that we're not at a greater like cortisol level than we need to be, so that even though things are definitely, you know, really crazy right now, that our nervous system isn't exploited further by the people who are doing shit.
Because again, humans are not designed to be in a state of stress for periods of time, right? Like, it is a situational response that is supposed to be activate, and then you do things about it. And then you stop making stress. So like there's all kinds of ways that stress damages the human body and reduces your lifespan. And
exactly. Yeah. And I know like flares, whether they're happening just randomly or if stress is triggering them, stress will not make them any better. So I'm trying to like figure out like ways to reduce stress without taking on, how do I put this, like a burden that isn't mine, because there is a point where I think acknowledging that like this isn't fair and it isn't our fault is actually critical and healing, but you have to do it around other people without bringing them down. So I'm trying to figure out like how to do that. But it's like, it's not to ruminate, but just to say that like, this has really hurt me and it wasn't fair and it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong to end up here. This is ridiculous. Like we have we have impossible standards.
And that's what they refer to as acceptance, like psychological acceptance. It's not just like literally accepting the truth of something, but accepting it without attached baggage, right? To accept that this is the state of affairs without it causing you stress, even though we consider it a default to be stressed out by things that are bad in your life. But all kinds of spiritual leaders and people have said, like, the key is to let go of the you can't control, because you can't control them. And stress exists for you to change your behavior, aka to do things with what you can control.
I started thinking about this too, even though like you may need a different name because I don't know what system we're entering, but like, so we'll say like capitalism, and like the concern with stress is that it's inflammatory and there's like inflammatory, pro-inflammatory processes around you. Okay, I'm like, cool, there's capitalitis. So we all have capitalitis. And we don't have capital, we just have capitalitis. That's what capital makes. It makes people with capital and people with capitalitis. And we have capitalitis.
And people talk about how there's so much more psychiatric illness now. And like, aside from us learning about it and looking for it, we also all have capitalitis. And capitalitis causes what we're calling mental illness, which these ones specifically would be better called mental wounds or distress. Specifically, right? The stress, mental stress causes mental distress, which is then becomes its own thing that you're carrying and is a wound that needs to be healed. Right?
Well,
a mental illness is something that someone already has before stress has happened.
Right, right. And we treat it as a disease when it could be an injury and we're not able to heal. So then it becomes more disease-like. But a lot of injuries, if you just like actually take care of them properly, don't advance to disease.
Right. And again, if we didn't know that injuries existed, right, and just ignored them completely whenever we got an injury, what would happen? People would get sick and die every time.
Exactly.
And right.
Exactly.
And so like the majority of like people who commit suicide, these are just people who have suffered from injuries that were left untreated and eventually succumbed to those injuries.
And injuries stack in a sense that like if you have pre-existing conditions and you get something like an illness or an injury, that pre-existing thing can impact the outcome such that like if you didn't get the disease or the injury, you would have still been around and kicking, but it can take you out because you've now had a new manifestation of the original problem. So what I think is like we should all think we all have a pre-existing condition of capitalitis. And that's what we all need to manage this like we have chronic illness or a chronic condition, because we do. Like, so all of your other conditions are now stacked on top of that. And we may experience it as like physical changes in our space or problems negotiating systems, but our body doesn't experience it like that. Our body experiences it like the injury or pro-inflammatory process that it actually is physically to us. So when people argue about it, it's like it's this semantic, and not I love going into words, so semantics is used against me sometimes, but it is semantic at that point of saying that like, well, these economic dinglings say it's this, that, or the other. I'm like, yeah, well, we have human bodies, so what it really is capitalitis. Is like I'm just going to use it forever now, I think, because like I don't know, or if there's like oligarchitis or something, but we have an inflammatory response and we're not getting to take care of that, so we should address our bodies, not just purely systems, like, and we need to take care of our bodies. And that's what I want to work on. And it doesn't then, this is the problem of working in your body. People then think you enter like a magical escapist realm or something where like maybe just meditate or something. No, it's not that. It's saying that like there are real problems happening as a result, and we physically have to treat them the way we would treat any real problem in our body. And this is difficult. Like, like my hips are feeling achy right now, and it sucks, but I have to know that this is part of the system.
And that's the issue with dualism being like a pre-supplied basic concept in so many parts of our society. Is like people think there's this divide between reality and their thoughts and their mind that isn't there. Right. And people will point to things like your mind having control over your body and your health as if that points towards dualism when it actually points away from it. Like if your mindset and the way you think can change your chances of recovering from a disease, that's because your mind is a literal physical part of your body that is doing literal physical things as part of your body to affect the other parts of your body. It's not because one is a super magical spirit thing from the spirit realm of Platonic ideals.
Yeah, it's inseparably interconnected. So you're just witnessing parts of the interconnection that we find a little bit confusing and therefore attribute magical properties to. I mean, if you look at humans, that's what we do. We assign magical properties to things as we find them, mysterious. But that's all that is. That's not nothing new at all. So that's super aggravating. That that's not coming through either. That's more superstition. That's not alternative medicine.
Okay, and then to bring us back, so you wanted to talk about stress reduction, which culture is called stress management, and I would say stress management is just a subsection of general affect and bodily management that we all have to do, which is then a subset of our project of building our daily life, which is then a subset of building the life that our life will be when we're done building it, right?
Yes.
So it's all part of the same project. And I think it is very helpful to specifically think of it that way, of saying, this stress management is something I need to do as part of living my day, as part of living my life. And so for my life to be functional, then I need to manage this so that I'm functional, so that I can build my life.
Yes.
And part of stress management can be done through mindset, right? Of reframing things into multiple different ways, like reframing small things from a negative to a neutral or positive. But then additionally, sort of like what I was saying of saying like, this isn't something I can control, so I'll accept that I can't control it and let it go. Because I think the stress is being generated by the fact that your brain is categorizing the situation as something within your control to fix. And so you're stressing, aka running your brain ragged, trying to worry, think about ways to affect the situation. But it's out of your control. You cannot change the situation that you're in. What you can control is like what you do now that you're in the situation. And then you can actually work on producing projects and projected actions. Oh, I like how those words line up. Like right? You project the actions you have to do to complete the project, which is the thing that you want to do in the world. So instead of being stressed about the material reality of your medical situation, you say, this is just how the world is, and that's not helping me do anything. And I'll stop thinking about that because I'm never going to be in charge of fixing this. That is not a reality that can happen within your lifetime. So those resources are wasted.
I wonder if it's a grieving process too, like for this might happen for autistic people just in general, where it's like the society said there would be certain things that would happen as adults.
Promised to you, right? We give promises, and we have to grieve the fact that they are not true. And I think everyone probably has to do this as part of being in capitalism, but it is especially bad for us because we are outliers in so many categories and ways. Like we are massive medical outliers in particular, while also being financial outliers. So we have less ability to access medical care, but we need to access medical care far more. But also, our medical care is far more complicated as well. And also, even if we have access to medical care, we have outside the norm difficulties in receiving useful medical care due to the biases of the people providing it, and so on, right? Like it's something nesting doll, a matryoshka of issues making this harder.
I think one of the ones I'm most resentful over, this is worth bringing up too. So because it's a coping mechanism.
Actually, while I was a little sort of manic, I signed up to get some advice on exercise and diet and stuff. And then they were like, okay, you could come to this free thing where we talk to you about your endocrinology and how, based on whatever, we could help categorize this for you even better. And then they're like, oh, you're trans. We can't do this, actually. Not that I'm complaining about that reality, but just the fact that I'm outside of the bell curve because I'm a trans person. And that changes my ability to interface with things. And I couldn't get that support that everyone else was going to.
Yes, exactly.
In the same way, there's just a bunch of support that we can't access, even though society promises us that we can. That's not true.
Right.
And there just isn't as much support for disability as people say there is at all. It's not even close.
No, exactly. And like even like the doctor that diagnosed me said there wasn't anything I could do but look for Facebook groups. I should have applied for disability. He should have asked me about my employment status and how much money I was making, but he didn't because he assumed that I was much more functional than even I even though we did this whole assessment, that somehow didn't land. That like, oh, she's not. I don't think they had put together
That's
the
another thing.
unemployment yet.
So that's a thing that you absolutely should put on your project list. Like you should be on disability, and to make that happen, you'll have to apply for it.
Well, now it might be too late depending on my job status, but like I missed out on years of
And I don't know the specifics about doing that kind of thing where you live and everything.
I mean, I feel like there should be retroactive. Anyways, that's kind of neither here nor there.
It's so hard anywhere. Plus, also,
it's not fair.
The current people are in office that are and everything too.
That's not happening. But okay, so then the other thing about that is what was I going to say? Oh, I wanted to say resentment I have. So I have had doctors pointedly ask me the like, do you do any drugs question? Like alcohol and drugs. I'm like, nope, I don't. I very rarely, almost never have even drank. And so part of the social contract that we were told as kids is like, if you don't use any substances, which people with learning disabilities sometimes use as a coping mechanism, and also normal people do, like
So I think I have suggestions for this when you're done laying out the problem.
Just that like this is one of the things that I was adamant about, and I would joke when I was younger, like even like in junior high, is like, well, my brain's weird enough, I don't want to make it any weirder, like I don't want a new like thing I haven't gotten used to. But that wasn't a joke, like anyways, but that was a part of the social contract. But then I look around and all the normal people are like definitely coping with alcohol or drugs at this point. Now they're on ketamine, I guess, but whatever. Like I'm a little annoyed that like I did that part extra right to try to make up for my disability, and it didn't do anything except, well, I mean, it's better, but definitely wouldn't have helped. But it doesn't actually do what they say it would have done, which is make life easy.
It says, yes, resentment can cause stress. When you hold on to resentment, your body stays in a heightened state of emotional tension, which can activate the stress response. And resentment often involves rumination, which keeps your mind stuck in a loop of negativity. And negative mind loops are the antithesis for motivation, as well as the fact that resentment can lead to stress. So like one tool for dealing with resentment is like an evolution of that thing where they're like, imagine your audience naked. No, you have to imagine that your doctor is a toddler, and you have already accepted the fact that you have to go through toddlers to get your medical care. And so you simply have to act as a responsible adult who's stuck in an unreasonable situation. And you have to treat your doctor like a toddler whose hand needs to be held through the process of providing you medical care for them to successfully provide you medical care. And that if you, as the only rational agent in the situation who could understand and change the situation, it's your responsibility to hold the doctor's hand so that they can give you medical care successfully, or else you won't get successful medical care. And that's not an outcome that's worth doing. And then you can then sort of live in the perverse glee of understanding this ridiculous situation. Which I think is a thing you know how to do.
Yes, I do. Yeah, clowning does that. Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. See them as toddlers. That feels kind of nice because I was promised adults, and I'm not getting adults.
Right, you were promised adults, and this is what we found out: is that there basically are no adults. Adults make up at most. It's being super, super helpful and giving 10% of the population. But no, it's more like 1% or less than 1%. People who actually meet the standards of adults that should be basic, which is like being kind of like Mr. Rogers. right? Just
Yeah.
being someone that Mr. Rogers wouldn't say, oh, you shouldn't deal with other humans, right?
Right.
That's the bar. Someone that Mr. Rogers wouldn't bar from dealing with other humans for a living. And almost nobody meets that basic standard on our planet right now. And that's just a fact. And so to deal with that, it's best to think of them as toddlers because we are predisposed to treating toddlers with kindness instead of hatred. And we're stuck dealing with them. And so doing, or if not kindness, I don't have to put it into words. You know what I mean when I say the way we treat toddlers.
Yeah. Yeah.
We sort of play along to get them to do the thing that they need to be doing and stuff like that. Oh, this is also a way to interact with their shared delusion to get what you need in reality out of them. That's what we do with toddlers sometimes.
Imaginative sort of play with them, yeah. Or even like maybe a little older than 6, like a kindergartner, basically. Like they give a little bit more,
I don't know a lot of
rationality
about ages in humans. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to be around like kindergarten age with my nonprofit stuff I was doing. So yeah, like definitely kindergartners.
It's also true that these doctors are not fully developed, right? So like to put it more literally, you're dealing with non-fully developed humans to get access to the one skill that they have developed fully, which is not even fully, but some level of medical expertise and knowledge. But they also have the trophy, right? Or the trophy or key card, right? They have the access pass to getting you the things that you do need. Because if you had that access pass, if you could get the medical test done for yourself and had access to all the books on the medicine, I know for a fact you would just figure it out yourself. You would just put all your energy into it and do it yourself because then it would be done. But no, we need their access passes.
Right. Yeah, I would have just been like, what are all the tests for all the diseases that I could possibly have? And then I'd be like, okay, give me these tests.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's compare this with let's do this a couple times. Like it seems like this just the thoroughness isn't there. They're like, well, this is good enough because it's going to rule out 99% of cases.
Right.
Like, is it though? Are you sure about that?
And again, there are very real material reasons that can't be thorough enough as well. And instead of being resentful about that fact, you have to work with it. You have to say, okay, this is what we're working with, and what can I do about this, right? So like, you could even look at specifics about your situation you're talking about and be like, oh, I need to bring like a folder or portfolio or dossier with me to do a quick like 30-second presentation of like what happened last episode for the doctor you're about to talk to, because you notice the pattern that they're not carrying around the context correctly to get you the care you need. So like you can then solve that problem somehow because you're an inventor.
Yeah, I can give them a rundown of what we've already done and what I think if it doesn't get done, we'll all look back at this and be stupid.
Yeah. And like you're good at building models. So you're building models of these people so you can tailor the rundown for what your model of them says they're going to need instead of the rundown you would give to yourself if you were the doctor, right? And I think that's an issue that's known to happen in autistic people, is that we sometimes model other people poorly because we model them too much like ourselves.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a skill you need to work on, is to remember that other people's internal worlds are very different than yours. And when you remember that to be a fact, you can then model it more successfully.
Yeah, that's I think that's hard. And it's what I think also, okay, like even just the stress of like trying to do perspective taking right now, it's just really hard. Like I wonder if like autistic people try to overcompensate for that too. Like we kind of know, You can vacuum. I'm gonna move. Kyle's gonna vacuum. I'm gonna go in the other room. So okay, so I have seen people online who are autistic trying to like get involved, and like we have a strong sense of justice, so therefore we should be talking about issues of unfairness. But then they try to take on the perspective of other people, which we're like categorically horrible at, and
Sure.
I don't think that works out very well for us. So like the autistic person, I think like we feel bad about not reaching our potential, so we are constantly trying to fix our moral reputation. Ooh, that seems accurate.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
So one, I think
Very
immediately the
accurate.
idea of investing yourself in moral situations that you do not have control over is something that needs to be actively avoided as an autistic person, because we are overly empathetic and have too strong of a sense of justice compared to the norm, or at least too strong for someone who has to live in capitalism, right? Such as the fact that like I became a vegan for a few years and then realized, wait, I just can't be doing this and still living my life because it is too much. And I'm like, okay, I just need to not worry about it. And yeah. In the same way, like unless you're going to control and change the situation, you need to be avoiding that because you have a limited amount of resources compared to most people, and you need to guard that spark and that flame within yourself of motivation.
Right. And it's also
right.
it's a little weird for like us. Okay, so because the way our society is laid out, it cannot possibly be moral towards disabled people. Like it can't be it doesn't respond pro-socially to what's really there, and it uses all kinds of things.
Which is also just subcategorized already in the fact that you cannot be moral in capitalism. There is no way to interact with and spend money in capitalism that doesn't engage with capitalism, which is a system of theft that has stolen the world from the inhabitants of the world and given it to the corporate elites and billionaires and everything, right?
Stolen the physical well-being of people. Like it's stolen people's lives.
The physical wealth as in property, land, and the results of their labor, right? The results of their labor is wealth, and that has all been taken from people and siphoned away.
Right, which came at the cost of their vitality and even
so,
existence.
So there's the issue, like we can, as autistic people, be predisposed to black and white thinking. And so if you add black and white thinking to a moral quagmire, like living on this planet Earth at the current time, and trying to interact with justice that's not directly part of your life, that you are interacting with and controlling, is a horrible recipe for wasted effort and energy and time and resources. Wasted as in there won't be any good outcomes, right?
Well, it's also it's a trap. Okay, so instead of I feel a clarity coming into my mind, which is really exciting. I was very stuck. But like instead of saying that because I am seen in ways or treated in ways that are immoral, I'm going to prove that I am a upstanding, extremely moral person. I don't need to prove that. I just am that. And having to prove that and basically dance monkey dance for these immoral people is them ridiculing morality itself. And I'm saying morality is pro-sociality. It's just this. I don't really love that term, but for the sake of brevity, with like the common
there's a
vernacular.
kind of denialation that happens when you point out somebody is living out of alignment with morality, right?
Yeah.
There's this hatred of vegans, that is like, it's a pageantry almost, because so many people do have an instinct to be like, well, it is bad to torture animals. And it is a fact that animals are tortured for the animal products that we all interact with. And people are like, well, I need that to not exist. So therefore, vegans are horrible people. And through denialating them, all of a sudden the statements that they make about reality aren't true anymore. And I don't have to feel that dissonance anymore. And so the same way, if we as disabled people point out that we aren't getting treated in a moral way, people are like, well, I don't want to deal with that emotional burden and dysregulation. And so their brain automatically, they have mimetic things inside of them that
Yes. Oh, this
make
makes
them
sense.
avoid
They're so yes.
taking that in.
I'm
Right.
quirky
And
and,
so,
and I'm quirky, so I must be quirky and whiny, right? My autism isn't real.
oh,
Therefore, now that I have lupus, that's also not
and
well.
so
Yeah.
so that archetype, the what do they call it? The manic pixie dream girl.
Yep.
Not so the manic pixie dream girl in media specifically turns that entire person into a tool for the male main character. But
Yep.
the projection of that onto actual humans projects as a divine angelic status, aka that you're immune to harm, that you cannot have a
Well,
bad
also,
outcome because you're a pixie.
yes, and I think also if you are a manic pixie dream girl without a boy to rescue, you're violating some social contract in people's minds. So you deserve whatever you get if you have a bad.
Right.
The boy
And so
finding
those are
your
two.
quirkiness endearing is also redemptive of you who have no other purpose. It's I think it is patriarchal against autistic women and anything that reminds them of it at this point. But like basically it's saying that because you're saying you deserve better treatment because we treat male geniuses well. No, you don't. You need a boy.
Sure, but I think like yes, and I think there's two different layers that function because there needs to be, because not everybody is as indoctrinated into
Right.
patriarchy and misogyny, right? So all that is true, but there are certainly a lot of people that aren't who won't have that script running in their brain the way you've sort of outlined. And for them, the idea of looking at you in as this other can put you into the like you're not mortal, and so things are just going to work out for you, and so it's okay that you're not getting the help I need. And so I actually run into this when I deal with when I'm trying to get like medical coverage. People will say like, "Oh, I'm sure there's something out there that will help you. Just keep looking." And I'm like, actually, I think no, actually. Like you work at the thing that I was told to apply for to get medical coverage and help. And you are saying that the organization you work for, I cannot get help there. So like this is just wishful thinking on your part, where you want to end this conversation and not be worried about me afterwards.
Yeah, because it's also that's fair. I think most people they actually do like us. Like even if they're at first they're like, oh, that's weird. Why is that thing like that? But I think we're likable, and that like that will come
most
through.
People's empathy and prosociality are functional. They're just suppressed or powerless to act on it in most circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. And that's heartbreaking too. So we can be even a reminder of people's powerlessness, which it's all symbolic, and it's just so sad because it's not, and this is our society, it's not relational. Like it's not like you and I are both commenting on the system that we are both in. Instead, you're making this person feel like the system is hurting them, but it is. So I don't understand why we don't just like be wounded together at this point. Instead, like I'm not going to attack somebody for being vulnerable. Why would I do that?
So I think that's part of this. I don't know if this would be separate from what you're calling capitalitis, but like there is a thing, if to function within capitalism, you have to be ignoring part of the issues of capitalism to stay functioning, right? If you're not a self-treating, if you're not self-treating through addiction, right? If you're not self-medicating through booze or whatever thing that you're using, then you're probably then you have to be disassociated to some degree from the reality of
Yes.
the state of affairs, because otherwise you'd be like us, right? You'd be a person who already has these conversations and already doesn't feel okay about things and already is looking for change and something different and everything.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Which again, like we're not
Exactly.
functional in capitalism because we're those people, and capitalism doesn't want us to be functional in it. We would be disruptive. We
Right.
plan on
We
being
would be.
disruptive,
It's
right?
so, yeah, exactly.
Oh,
We're literally
and actually
trying to figure out how to be a
getting
little
back
bit
to
more
the
disruptive.
justice thing, it's like, well,
Yeah.
you cannot be a disruptive agent of change when you're currently drowning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like stop everything, stop until you stop drowning, right?
Right.
And that's sort of
Well,
the sort of thing we're trying to talk about today, and with stress management too, is that so like part of not drowning right now is you need to breathe, and that's doing things that get rid of your stress.
yeah,
You need
exactly.
to do some things that put that out of your mind and give you your positive feeling.
Well, and like this is what's interesting. So like on one hand, I'm not really looking forward to checking in. I like my new doctor better, but like he was going to send me to the old rheumatologist. I'm like, I need to go to a different rheumatologist, and I need to go now because my joints are now painful, which like hip hip hooray. Apparently if my joints are painful, I think they're going to just do it. I think we're just going to be like, oh, this flare is bad enough. It's in the right spot that. So I finally have the gold standard symptom that I think they can't ignore. So it's so even just like, I don't know, like try to tie this into what you were saying, because that's how it came up for me. In this situation, you have to say something that's like the magic word before you can say anything else. People let their guard down with the magic words of like, yeah, this system is fine. Like you have to do the this system is fine thing before you can start to criticize it. Like you have to already be acknowledged as legitimate somehow before you can say. So I have to get the SLE diagnosis from the hips being painful before I can say, hey, what you did for 20 years was fucked up.
Right. Well, and so this is why I'm nervous about my autism assessment that's coming up, is because being officially diagnosed with autism is going to work as a magic card to get certain officials to use their access pass on my behalf.
Yeah,
And give me access to the resources that they're the gatekeepers of.
Yes.
Oh, right. So there we go. A fundamental issue with doctors and other people in these positions to help people with disabilities is that they are innately gatekeepers of access to the resources that we need access to. And so they are put in a double bind position where they're both meant to help and represent us, but are also the person in charge of not helping or deciding not to help us.
Deciding they're well, like you say, like triaging, but it's a little bit frustrating at this point because as the system collapses around us, first of all, it was a little more abstract before, but I'm like, as the system collapses, it's going to hurt disabled people. Now that in America, they're actively being like, yeah, fuck disabled people. Like it's just basically that's what's happening.
Cough,
And
cough,
the
504.
yeah, exactly. And the the town halls that are happening where people are trying to gaslight people while they're booing them in their face, they're still like, in my reality, la la la. So we're dealing with like it taking as many masks off as we've ever seen, and it could go more mask off still, but that's the social contract, is like you have to have like Mickey Mouse cartoon level bad guy before we're like, oh, we're gonna stand up for you.
I just realized another one of the reasons Trump is like defunding everything is that like literally he's trying to radicalize the American people into his cult. And so when you make it harder for the American average person, working man or whatever, to get the bare minimum that he was getting before. He's now susceptible to being radicalized. And all Americans
Right.
are inoculated against being radicalized into socialism and like other forms of collective, or what's the word? Just like working together and towards authority positions.
Yep.
Um,
Well, here's the
right.
problem though. So what they've okay, I think this is going to
So,
blow up
so basically, they're like,
ultimately.
we're going to turn off the stream of like resources for healthcare so that
Yeah.
you guys will fight the people who need it the most to get the amount that you were getting before, and they'll
But
have
see,
none. That'll
this
save
is
us
where I
money
think
and radicalize you. Yeah, go ahead.
they lost the plot. So they think the number of people with diagnoses is the number of people with chronic illnesses and disability. That's not true. It's way underdiagnosed. So these effers, these little heifers, think that people aren't going to start talking to each other and be like, "Wait, I am the people you're talking about. I'm disabled."
Yes.
Wait. So it's not going to go very well. They think that there's a what is it? A cadre of normal people in a little normal people silo, like we're all zombies or something. No, we're all with each other all the time. And they have to stop. Like, if you've ever been around somebody with a disability, you don't want them to stop having their disability. You want their disability to be accommodated. The disability isn't like a thing that you find disgusting. People don't find disability disgusting. They find it something that they apply their empathy towards. It's only sociopaths who don't understand that, and that's who's in charge. So they really think people are just going to be collectively sociopathic all the time, and that's not going to succeed to the degree they think. There are definitely people in that cult that's the problem.
And also, I don't particularly think that there's any more converts for that cult out there. Like,
I think they got them all.
I think they got them all during COVID because that was basically a precursor to what they want to do now. They want to do what they did during COVID again to all of the healthcare people get. And so it's going to, like, there's no one who's not going to be affected personally, as in like someone they know and in their family is going to get sicker and die because of their healthcare being taken away. And you have to take on a very ghoulish cult narrative to be okay with, oh, my grandparents are dying because of this law that we passed.
Yes. This is
which again they said out loud during COVID. They were like, it's okay if some people's grandparents die. That's just what they said.
So exactly. And like there's a lot of people talking about narcissism and like other wounds, and I guess that's the hard part right now, and why I'm thinking about like capitalitis or something as a way to phrase this. So because we have to interact way more often with people who have pathological narcissism, or at least have like a mass psychosis where they're mirroring that, like they're kind of like having some other state, it's very, very challenging to be around those sorts of people, and that's why like people will go no contact. And we can't go no contact.
We were just talking about their, instead of mental illness, there's a lot of things that are like mental wounds or whatever. And we've used before the metaphor of people like self-butchering or whatever. There are so many people that by being indoctrinated into this cult have the self-inflicted or cult-inflicted wound of mirroring psychopath and narcissist behavior.
Right. Exactly.
Would be a succinct way of framing what you were saying.
Yeah, that's right.
That makes
and so
and so we all have to interact with them, because not only are there so many around, but they're in the chief office and literally saying things like, "I'm going to be king," or "I am king," or whatever.
And it's
looking
very
to
much
actively subvert democracy.
We need equivalents of like masks, basically, that we could wear, because like same thing, that the way that they're treating their own illnesses, right? They won't put on a mask when they're sick. They won't put in any effort to keep other people safe from their problems. We need to then know that that's what's going on. Like they're trying to infect other people actively, regardless of what it does to people. I mean, nobody has
they're
the same response to it.
systemically trying to infect other people.
Yeah, exactly.
I forget who
And
said it, but
they'll
like a system is what it does, or a system is for what it does. So their
Yeah.
cult brainwashing doesn't tell them that their goal is to go out and infect more people, but that actually is what they're trying to do by not
And they're
wearing
trying to
masks
use, if they can infect you, they're going to try to use you. Like that's why they have like libs of TikTok or whatever. They're trying to use
Mhm.
you as a way to infect other people. So they're trying to like make sure that whatever happens, more people be infected depending on who they interact with. That's the only goal of interaction is infection.
Right.
So
And
you don't want
they're
that.
using you as a scapegoat, right? And
Yeah.
to say also like they're an infectious scapegoat. So don't be like them, because then the bad thing will happen to you as well.
Right, exactly. Very, very Darbo shit right there too. Very inverted reality. All of that, those insights are so good, and I know that like a lot of people are having them, so that makes me feel a lot better. But okay, I had almost an epiphany of like how to get out of this. Like, you know what it's like? Okay, so the weird whatever, that kid that was in the White House or whatever for no reason, and he's a kid, so he's like wiping his snot on everything. Like some people are like kindergartners and toddlers that are like cool, and some of them are like doing that. And I think that's what it is like I just got to think of some people as like they're just full of snot and they just wipe snot on everything. And even if I'm around them, then they're going to try to wipe snot on my stuff.
Right.
Even if they can't get me sick, they're going to try to get anything around me sick.
Right.
Or be a vector.
And if they were susceptible to you convincing them not to spread snot on things, someone would have already taught them not to do that. So I think that's an important addendum to help remind you not to engage with this person, because they're not doing it out of lack of being told that it's unsafe. They're actually doing it in spite, or not in spite of, but to spite being told that it's unsafe. Like with the mask thing, like literally to spite the fact that doctors told them accurate things about biology. They said they decided to do the opposite and spread the plague on purpose.
Yes.
Despite
On
the
purpose.
doctors.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and then it's a cult, and it's a cult being sold like snake oil, right? So like the reason people have been sold this cult and bought it online is a combination of their susceptibility to it for a bunch of bad reasons that other people aren't susceptible, but also because they're in the same material reality we are, and so they are also aware of the problems with the world and like problems with doctors, but they don't understand, like they literally don't understand or follow logic. So they're able to be said, you could just say crazy stuff like this oil from a snake will prevent measles because I said so, or whatever. They're just able to say this will fix, you put the CEO in charge of the country and then doctors will be fixed because he will literally root out the swamp. So he's going to get rid of the crocodiles and snakes, and therefore doctors will be better. And again, it's like the toddler thing, where it's like, well, the part of their brain is so undeveloped that they will accept logic that only a toddler would accept.
Yeah. Yep, that tracks. That all tracks. Okay, so let's see. I think Adam probably left because we were kind of going in my own shit a little bit. I hope that's okay. But okay, I still want to try to talk about like things that would be generally helpful and what is, let's see. Hang on, give me a sec. My brain's like noting a little bit. I don't want to sell autism to people, right? Like that's one thing about these streams that I think is important, is like it's never gonna have a large audience, or it'd be very strange if it did. I don't know how that would even happen. I was told some inaccurate stuff about how people would respond to autistic people. I think autism is still sort of divorced from the material circumstances, even though that doesn't make any sense. But now it's getting pulled into like there's stuff outside of our control, but it's definitely happening, and I don't feel gaslit anymore because I'm like, well, see, I knew it wasn't just me messing up. This is impossible to navigate, and the supports that I have don't exist. I really should have supports at this point. Like this doesn't make any sense.
And
it makes no sense.
One of the supports that literally every autistic person should have is somebody who helps them navigate these systems. Like we should all have access to some amount of time with a support worker that helps us navigate the medical
Somebody
system,
should be helping
financial
me get
systems and so on.
Yes.
Like
Exactly.
we should be getting like time with an accountant or something like that. Somebody who a financial manager, I guess would be the term, right? Like we should be being provided financial managers, medical access managers, I guess you would say, or just like bureaucracy managers, people who help you through the hoops of bureaucracy in general that you as in your specific situation need help with.
Exactly. So like, for example, like I tried to see if I could get a loan because that would have helped a lot, but I couldn't. But the lady that was at the bank was really nice and said like she could help me build a credit score. I tried to do that, or I tried to have a credit card once and it was terrible. And she said like that's fixable. So I was like, oh, that's cool. So like somebody who did stuff like that with me would be awesome. Like instead of like as an autistic, you should teach yourself all this. No, you should not.
Right. No.
Like absolute that's absolute lie. So you can fail at it more spectacularly. Like that's why we're avoiding it. And I hate this, like it's not learned helplessness. I have a disability. You have to know where that line is. I'm getting really annoyed, especially when I have transferable experiences and I'm like, yeah, this isn't making sense. Like I like I'm gonna have to stop HCATing physically in a moment because my hips hurt too much now, and I'm like, I guess I should lie down. Like I don't know, I'm navigating this blind. But if I had someone that helped me to make sure I got to the right doctor and dealt with that, like I should have like a fucking caseworker. And I don't care if someone's like, but other people need caseworkers. I'm like, okay, then everyone should have a caseworker that needs one. Yeah. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because
and also like there
shouldn't be a back of the line for caseworkers.
Before COVID, the main topic anyone was talking about was that all the jobs were going to disappear. So if you're saying, oh, a new job should exist, that would be great. That would be a good thing according to their logic of how capitalism has to function.
And their logic also says that like women don't actually perform labor, even though it's $1 trillion of industry a year for everyone. So there's that.
Oh shit! So that's part of why doctors are so bad. Actually, that's part of why doctors are so, because some of the most important parts of what a doctor has to do has been delegated to nurses who are predominantly women and paid less than their worth by a lot, because it's the accompanying opposite to the doctor. Like you take a doctor and a nurse together and you make one healthcare worker that has all the things that you need, right? Both the authority to do the things they need to do and the care to do them, right? Because like nurses are picking up the slack for doctors all the time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's their additional job that they have to do on top of their direct job because they're women as a class.
Yeah, exactly.
Women.
Right. Right. And that's exactly right. And I've, it's a role. Like, so the doctor has to act different than a nurse. Well, how is the doctor different than a nurse in their behavior? Oh, well, they're going to be the patriarch in this, even if they're a woman, which I had a woman doctor and it was a mess.
Yep. Yeah.
Not that I've also had women doctors that were much better than the men that I saw in the same things too. So that's typically, but occasionally, like if they really want to succeed, they kind of have to.
When they're that better doctor, they are going against the grain of what we're told a doctor is supposed to be like.
Exactly.
More like what we think of a nurse as being like, right? They are
and they usually
more feminine, to use those terms. Yeah.
The woman doctor that I was talking with that gave me better advice on my hip, and I'm going to go get a different procedure that's less invasive to try it first, right? She was like leveling with me. She just had a baby, you know? And we were talking about like some of the consequences if I do attempt to see if I could, you know. So she was like talking to me like a human being who was also a human being. And like it's very much like, oh, I'm going off script,
are more
but this is
connected
important
to
for me
being
to
a
tell
human
you.
being. Is because like pregnancy in most cases is a temporary disability that you go through for more than 9 months.
It just is.
So
it is a disability, 100%.
Sure. I was going to say, the versions where it's not treated as a disability are whitewashed and managed and not actually real experiences. You are correct.
No.
It is a disability that women are expected to go through. And so.
And you don't know how it's going to disable you. It's super fucking random.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be, because technically it's not. Like, we still live in a causal universe.
In general as well, the pressures on women treat women to be afraid of their inevitable disabilities, right? Like when you go barren, like the thing that's going to happen to you and everyone's going to treat you differently. So like just in an embodied sense, women are closer to the experience of being disabled by nature.
Exactly. Financially disabled on top of it, right? And that's exactly. So
and also of course, women
people can dissociate from that
labor. The amount of unpaid labor that disabled people have to do for themselves is astronomical.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. And this whole thing. Go ahead.
In fact, there are people who get paid to take care of disabled people, right? To do the things that I do for myself every day and that I do for my spouse, right? Like the government should be paying me to take care of myself. On top of giving me the money that I have to spend to take care of myself, I should be additionally getting a full-time income because I am taking care of 2 disabled people full-time.
Right.
The same way that the government is paying people to raise their children.
Yes, exactly.
Because like countries,
you're the worker.
So the government is the regulatory body that keeps society functioning so that companies can exploit it, right? So if the government didn't exist, the companies would have to pay people to have kids and raise those kids and then train those kids. And instead, in our system, it's the opposite. You have to pay to have a kid, and then you have to pay to raise your kid, and then you have to pay for that kid to get an education. But then the companies get to exploit that education and human being that exist only because you have paid for them to exist, right?
Exactly. And okay, this is all very good. What did I want to say about this? I mean, you just for clarity's sake, like these roles are imposed on people, and there are certain traits that are exploited at times to make these roles function. But there's nothing in tune with embodied reality about these roles. They're an inversion of things, or confusion of things. So we don't get to really know what we are or address what our needs really are, and that's why it's all messed up. So I just want to like emphasize that, but it's, just a little detail so people don't think there's like essentializing going here. It's not that, it's different. Anyways, but that's no one's even listening. But
So also I got the book where the person first used the term hierarchy, and I'm going to start using hierarchy instead of patriarchy because it's a hierarchy is an interconnected, interacting, and self-extending systems, plural, of domination and submission. Because I was reading some stuff about the gender binary and how that language is anti-helpful to the work of feminism. And I think talking about patriarchy implies to a lot of people this binary. exists in more, and that like you're one or the other. And it's much more complicated than that. Like it's not a hierarchy. It is a complicated set of multidimensional attributes to see who should be dominated, when, and how, and who needs to submit.
Because it's really a critique of hierarchy itself as an organizing principle, but that's actually bullshit. That like hierarchies don't exist; they just are about threats.
Right, and so like hierarchy is interconnected systems of domination. So it can't be a hierarchy, because a hierarchy actually puts people in a hierarchy, and you can't do that with just the labels that oppression is being done over. It's constantly moving. Like people don't just fit into a class or caste or anything. It's a living social movement that is being done to people in real time.
Yes. Yes.
Hierarchy implies like a neat categorization, and so that's
right.
a lot of
and
things
that is natural,
especially autistic people who are trying to learn about feminism will bring up these things. We're like, well, this doesn't fit. Like, why are these exceptions? And so like that's why I'm moving to this language specifically, because they're not exceptions when you talk about hierarchy.
Can you tell me about the person that came up with hierarchy? I'd like to know more about them.
Yeah, so it was Elizabeth Schusler Fiorenza, and she is I think it's a biblical scholar.
Hey Lilith, can you type out the spelling for that?
So this book is called "But She Said," and it's on a previous work. Yeah. But She Said: Feminist Practices of Biblical Interpretation, and I've only read literally 8 pages. But basically, what she talks about is that no woman alive in the next foreseeable future can interact with society at large without being forced to interact with the Bible, because society has been built upon the Bible. And so you need to have a feminist reading of the Bible to be able to work, to interact with these systems if you're going to be producing change.
Interesting. Yeah. That's so, I'm kind of surprised that's actually where it came from. You know what I mean? Like, I've heard people use the term, but I doubt they've read her book.
Oh, yeah, almost.
Because it's from 1993. Wow.
Yeah.
Term is older than me somehow.
Yeah. Huh.
Right, and like actually some of the places that say where hierarchy come from quote her in a later work than this one.
Right.
So like it's not so it's like sort of the opposite situation with Judith Butler, who is like over quoted and used too much. This person is not actually being addressed properly or read at all. Probably
that's happening a lot. I need to study that phenomenon more. I have some books on it that I just need to read. Well, that's the other thing, is like what will make me feel better is reading more. Ultimately, my mom probably knows who this person is, actually, based on when she's writing. Yeah.
With what you've said, your mother's interests are.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Good voice. She's Roman Catholic. Yeah.
Yeah. What is your mother, Roman Catholic or Catholic?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Roman Catholic. Interesting. There's one called The Power of
It's not impossible that you. It's not impossible that you currently have a book by this woman in your house. Then, right?
Exactly. It's not even remotely impossible. Like I might just find one. Okay.
Yeah, she was saying that this book builds off of a previous one that she put out as well. But
interesting. Great. Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to be reading that too then. I'll get it from the library. I'm going to start going to that because Amazon can stuff it.
She starts out talking about The Handmaid's Tale in her introduction. And it's like, yeah, well, the fact that someone says that that is what people like to do with the Bible and takes that into
Right.
a biblical interpretation. I'm like, yes, I'm
Wow.
super excited to read this.
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. Great. Okay, cool. I love how there's no picture of the author when I still use Amazon to find things, but like no picture of the author. Cool, that's great. She barely exists and they're using the word she made. Okay.
It's
Dope
a
though.
woman. What
Thank
do
you
you
for that.
expect, Jane?
Right, exactly. What do I expect?
Well,
Oh
and
dear.
it's a woman who's not doing the work of patriarchy for them. Because
Mhm.
I was reading a bunch of the critiques of Judith Butler recently, and I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
these are the bad ideas that are being spread by Judith Butler's bad reasoning. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
My
Yep,
sarcasm
yep.
didn't come across well enough in what I said, but I
No.
assume it was
Hey,
understood.
she's still alive. She's like 86 years old. She's a little lady with a little white
Good
bob.
for her.
Yeah.
86 is getting up there. Good
Wow.
for her.
Harvard Divinity School. So she's wow. She's yep. Okay. Okay. I'm just like upset for a second. I was like, really?
And just completely ignored.
Yeah, Romanian-born German. Interesting. Probably has an interesting perspective from that. Roman Catholic feminist theologian. We could have been listening to her. You guys, instead of like mega church lunatics.
Yep.
God damn it. Oh, hold on. My hands on
I
my
both
head
love this
position.
and am annoyed at the same time.
Oh my god. Oh my god. It's just so infuriating. Oh, okay. Hold on. All right. My soul will enter my body again and I will reanimate and then I will move on. Okay. Goody schmoody. But all right, I'm inclined to use hierarchy too. I'm gonna read her book. That changes my opinion of like where we should go with things. Cause like I really do put a lot towards like women who have had no attention given towards them.
Right.
Despite she's like she did the thing. She got the points. She scored the
She went to the
baskets in
place
your
and did
system.
the thing. And so she got to at least be published. Like that was
Ah!
now a reward that she got, right? She
I
got
know
accepted
a
in
bunch of
now
times.
her
She's
feminism
written like
published repeatedly
20 books.
again and again. Yeah. So many books, actually. Like so
Oh,
many looking at this list. And yeah, like rhetoric and
here's
ethic, the politics of biblical studies,
the
Jesus and the
discipleship.
politics of interpretation.
The discipleship of equals from the August 9th, 1985 issues of Commonweal, which I can read right now on the internet, reproduced in a loving manner. Like this is held up pretty nicely, but
Right. And like the title of this book, The Politics of Interpretation, I'm like, oh, right. This reminds me of what I read that she said about The Handmaid's Tale, is that like they took away the Bible from the people and especially women so that only men could read it to you, so that only the male interpretation of the words
Yes,
would come to
literally,
you.
literally, literally on the sidebar. You know how they put like little quotes in italics and stuff, nice
Uh-huh.
purple quotes. The silent exodus of women from active participation in the Roman Catholic Church will continue if the coming synod does not recognize that the hierarchy, especially in the Vatican bureaucracy, has failed to implement the teaching of the Council on Human Rights and Dignity within the institution of the Church. 1985. 1985. She's talking. Here, I'm going to read this paragraph. Okay. Already before the council, Pope John recognized that women's struggle for justice and wholeness ought to be recognized by the church. In his encyclical Pacem in Terris, the Pope remarked that, hold on, my stream is going to end if I don't put a puzzle piece on a screen. I hate the internet. Okay. Already before the council, blah, 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 blah. In the encyclical Pacem in Terris, the Pope remarked that, quote, the sign of our times, end quote, are the economic and social advancement of the working class, the equality of colonial peoples and races, and the participation of women in public life. The more we women become conscious of our human dignity, the more we must claim the rights and duties which accord with this dignity as human persons. Just as women and men suffering from the evil of racism must claim their rights as their signs of their dignity, so all women must insist that others have the duty to recognize and value women's rights. Like 1985, damn it.
Yes, I'm like, wow, that is extremely well worded, and I clearly need to read more that this woman has written, right?
Yeah.
Because our thought leaders existed, and they were hidden from us. We don't have to do all the work ourselves, right? Like people have already
Right.
done
Right.
it, and we can learn from them. That's great.
Damn it. Okay. Wow. All right.
Democratizing biblical studies towards an emancipatory educational space. Like, holy heck, that's amazing. Just the titles are amazing.
Mm-hmm. Schussler Fiorenza has argued that women can only discover God's grace and presence in their struggle for liberation. Interesting. Huh.
That sort of matches like my personal reading and understanding that like God only exists in the emancipatory figure of Lucifer or the snake or the guy who brings fire to people and gets tortured because of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm having a good time just taking a break for this. Plus, my hips are like, ow, 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 ow. A little bit. It's a weird pain.
To take the Bible literally, that like there is something called Satan that doesn't like people and wants bad things for them, then Yahweh or the God of the First Testament is the most likely person to fit that definition, who has resources in the world working against people and causing their suffering. Look at all the suffering caused by the churches in the name of this so-called God that this book has spread, right? Like this book is the book that can teach you to dislike the God in this book and work against him, because that's not a real God that a human social would worship ever, right? Like if someone says, I'm going to torture you unless you worship me, it is not human nature to say, yes, I'm going to worship you now. It is to fight with everything you have.
Mind you, that is almost every god ever that is discussed.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, because a real God wouldn't want you doing those things. And yeah, if you imagine something all good, then obviously that can't be.
Ooh. Congress of Women, Religion, Gender, and Hierarchical Cult. Here's her talking. Congress of Women, Religion, Gender, and Hierarchical Power. Here's 2 of these presentations. This must be the same.
Could you share those links in chat?
Yes, I can. Yeah, maybe we can watch that together. We can pick which one we want to do. I think it's probably the same presentations from 2017.
Oh yeah, we could like watch one together right now. That would be great. And then you could sort of rest a little bit for the rest of the stream as well.
Is there stuff on screen for this, or is she just talking?
She's just talking, I think. She's just standing at a podium, so I don't think there's gonna be anything.
Yeah. If there's anything important visual, can somebody let me know?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So.
Because I'm cleaning my kitchen.
Okay.
Let me give you 2 options. I don't know which one we wanted to go with. It seems to be similar length and presentation. Is that the same one? Maybe it's the same one. No, I think we're good. I think it's the same one. They just put it in 2 spots. Okay, that's fine by me. All right, let's go ahead and listen to this. Let me share my screen. All right,
Yeah,
everyone,
so
we're
that
going to listen to this now.
the first link that you sent links to the second link you sent.
Yeah,
So they're
okay. And we've
literally
got
the same video. Yeah.
literally the same video. It looked like the
Okay.
thumbnail was a
Then
different shirt. Okay.
Are you
yeah.
sharing your
Let's go.
screen for it? Or
Yeah,
I'm
you'll
going
need to
to,
share
yeah.
so we can listen. Awesome. Okay.
Okay, let me do that.
And then whoops.
All right, everyone, we're going to listen to this instead. I guess I'm going to go off the live for TikTok because definitely TikTok, this is above their parental page there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah. Okay, everyone good?
I'm good.
Yep.
I have to watch this too, or else I can't hear it.
And thank you all for coming tonight to the Center for the Study of World Religions for our book event celebrating this wonderful book, Congress of Women, Religion, Gender, and Kyriarchal Power. I should say first that this is part of a series the center has every year. It's been one of my favorite events as director of the center these years. When faculty have new books, inviting faculty to present their work, a chance to celebrate our colleagues' work, and to hear something of the genius that went into it, the energy, the blood, sweat, and tears perhaps that went into the book in order that we can understand how these great books come about. Too often I find we're busy with too many things, moving around, and when somebody has a new book come out, we say, oh, great book, congratulations, and then that's the end of it. So I think this is a chance tonight to be able to once again enter more deeply into a colleague's work. Advertising, next Monday at this time, we have Usman Khan, Professor Khan of our faculty, Beyond Timbuktu, an intellectual history of Muslim West Africa. And then on April 18th, we'll have Harvey Cox's new book, Mark It as God. So this is part of a series, but I cannot think of a better book to celebrate tonight than that of our distinguished colleague, Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza. Let me tell you a little about a person I'm sure is very well known to all of you already. Elizabeth has her PhD from the University of Münster in theology and intertestamental literature and New Testament. She taught at the University of Notre Dame and also here in Cambridge at the Episcopal Divinity School before coming to Harvard Divinity School and the University in 1988, where she is the Christoph Stendhal Professor of Divinity. She is truly one of our most well-known, globally well-known and respected faculty. She has done pioneering work in biblical interpretation, feminist theology. Her teaching and research focus on questions of biblical and theological epistemology, hermeneutics, rhetoric, and the politics of interpretation, as well as issues of theological education, radical equality, and democracy. She is also the co-founder and co-editor of the Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion, and has been a founding co-editor of feminist issues of the journal Concilium. She was elected the first woman president of the Society of Biblical Literature, and she has served on the boards of many major biblical journals and societies. In 2001, she was elected a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It takes too long to talk about her many, many publications, but just to give you a sample, possibly, I don't know if she can say for herself, her most famous book, In Memory of Her, which has been translated into at least 13 different languages. Bread Not Stone, The Challenge of Feminist Biblical Interpretation. But She Said, Feminist Practices of Biblical Interpretation. Revelation, Vision of a Just World, Searching the Scriptures, all the way down to Transforming Vision, Explorations in Feminist Theology. In recognition of her work, she's received many honorary doctorates. I count here 6 or 7 from universities here and in Europe. This book tonight, Congress of Women, Religion, Gender, and Kyriarchal Power, takes up issues of politics, struggle, resistance, social transformation, but also friendship and community. And I note inside the cover that it's dedicated to co-workers who have shared with her in the work of feminist studies and religion over the past 30 years. And a remarkable fact that perhaps she will talk about, or we can talk about in our discussion, is that there is a final section to the book, which I'll pass around in a moment, bringing in, I count as many as 7 or 8 of her junior colleagues. in the field, and I think representing the very collegial nature of her work, wanting to hear from younger scholars, the new generation, as she proposes her own theme. So I think it's a book that also models teaching and models the kinds of conversation to which she points us. So our plan tonight will be to give Elizabeth the first chance to talk about the book, how she came to write it, any struggles along the way, what she hoped to gain out of it, how it came to have the structure it has, and then we'll have three discussants, and I'll introduce them at that point. And then the final part of our evening together will be conversation with all of you. So let us begin our session tonight by welcoming Elizabeth Schüssler-Fiorenza.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm one of these people who, according to Ikunga, couldn't be ordained because their voices won't carry for preaching. So I'm happy that we open this semester's faculty book discussions with a feminist work, and want to thank Professor Clooney, the director of the center, for making these discussions possible. I want especially to express my gratitude for his warm welcome today and for hosting this event. I also want to recognize and thank the CSWR staff, Ariella Ruth Goldberg and Dory Lee Goering, for organizing, publicizing, and preparing this discussion. I greatly appreciated that despite of inordinate time pressures, my colleagues, Dean Melanie Johnson de Boffre and Professor Nancy Pineda-Madrid, accepted the invitations to participate in this discussion of Congress of Women. I especially want to thank Ms. Kelsey Morrison-Atkins, who, as my research assistant, has worked tirelessly, not only on the book from the beginning to, I almost said to the end, from the beginning to the first proofreading, but also has helped to prepare this event. I'm glad to report that her dissertation proposal on the rhetoric of dress and adorning adornment in the conception of identity in early Christianity was today approved by the doctoral committee. Congratulations. Congress of Women has its roots in the invitation to give the distinguished Cathedra McKay lectures at the Universidad Bíblica Latinoamericana in Costa Rica in 2012. These were published as Poder, Diversidad y Religión, Power, Diversity and Religion in 2013. Because the lectures were well received, I decided to edit and revise them for publication in English. When critically working with students through the chapters of the manuscript of my book, Democratizing Biblical Studies, I had a very positive experience, and Tyler is still here from this seminar. I had a very a positive experience. Hence, I decided to adopt the same collaborative teaching process in my fall 2014 graduate seminar on feminist theories and theologies, and planned the syllabus and readings for the seminar around the Costa Rica lectures. Through the lively seminar discussions, the topic and focus of the book was clarified to be on kyriarchal power and not just on gender. And diversity was articulated in terms of collaboration, imagined as Congress of Women. Since at the same time, Feminist Studies and Religion decided to initiate a book series, I volunteered the manuscript as test case for the first volume in the series, and also to signal a theoretical vision or branding, to use Trump's expression, for this new book series. Congress of Women was developed in the context of neoliberal American hierarchical democracy, which increasingly displays anti-democratic elements that are often sanctioned by Christian religious language. Poverty engendered by neoliberalism, destabilization of whole nations through military conflict, slave trade around the globe, fear of terrorism, and the ever-expanding war on women constitute, therefore, the horizon of feminist thought and struggles and of this book. In her book, blurb for Congress of Women, Professor Maria Pilar Aquino has prospectively recognized this context and aim of the book. I quote her. Amidst neoliberal globalization, Schüssler Fiorenza declares that the social force of religions must be devalued, devoted to promoting hope, justice, and well-being for all. She sees religion as an ethical political space for imagination and change, and rightly advocates for closer collaboration between feminist theology, theory, and movements. More expansively, Congress of Women offers an exciting vision of feminism, working in greater solidarity with social justice activists, religious leaders, and community builders to transform global hierarchical powers. To bring about change, feminist transnational networks and movements have developed resonant theoretical practical frames that inspire and motivate the struggles of women cross-culturally and around the globe. Such transnational feminist networks have been successful because their politics is goal-directed rather than identity-based. Access of the process of alternative globalization from below raises the question why feminist theology and studies in religion have remained stuck in the identity politics of the 80s and 90s, replicating again and again the North-South or First World, Third World rhetoric, rather than creating global, transnational, transracial, transgender, or transreligion networks for articulating common goals. If neoliberal globalization engenders fundamentalist and anti-women's movements around the globe, then feminist theology and studies in religion have to move beyond discussing identity politics to elaborating religiously and theologically transnational feminist theoretical practical frames which inspire and motivate women cross-culturally. We need to develop theoretical frames and organizational strategies that will focus on these global issues of women's rights and justice and articulate them not only in theoretical terms, but also explore them in terms of sacred scriptures, religious traditions, and liberationist imaginaries. This would require a much closer collaboration between scholars and ministers, academic intellectuals, religious leaders, and community builders. An examination of neoliberal capitalist globalization thus calls for a critical feminist analysis and for engendering global feminist trans-confessional movements for conscientization in religions. It calls for a reorientation of feminist theology and studies in religion towards their roots in the global women's liberation movements. Feminist studies in religion need to test and evaluate postmodern feminist theories and mainstream scholarship in terms of the struggles against the devastating consequences of capitalist globalization and in support of global feminist movements that struggle for the well-being of everyone, without exception, as well as for the flourishing of the planet. I recognize the important tools which postmodern deconstruction has given us for interrogating the forms of knowledge that produce stereotyping forms of power and pervasive ideologies of kyriarchal domination in language which colonizes the imagination. However, I disagree with the totalizing deployment of this approach, which tells us that there is no way to escape either the self-referential system of language or the powers of exploitation when we attempt to produce knowledge that is transformative. Hence, we need not only to engage in deconstruction and critical struggle, we also need to engage in practices of revisioning and articulating methods and practices of dekyriarchalization of the imagination, de-imperializing scripture and theology, and decolonizing of the divine. Historically, it is the language of democracy, equality, and justice, articulated in different cultural and religious tongues, that provides an alternative imaginary space to kyriarchal imperialism. Although democracy has different shades of meaning in different historical contexts that are not always liberating, I agree with Adriana Hernandez that democracy, through the times, has been and still is the discourse that sets the terms for critique of current affairs and institutional orders and creates the basis for their change. Articulating the women's movement as the ecclesia or Congress of Women that is responsible for the cosmopolis of women, I suggest, offers a political language and space for feminist imagination to develop public religious discourses of justice, difference, freedom, equality, and solidarity. The challenge then today seems today whether we can, in and through the deconstruction of kyriarchal inscriptions, articulate an alternative religious imagination different from that of the imperial imaginary of Christianity. Since religious fundamentalisms draw on the kyriarchal language of empire, inscribed in Christian scriptures and traditions, emancipatory studies in religion, I argue, must also draw on scriptures and traditions for reconstructing democratic egalitarian visions, which are also inscribed in religious scriptures and traditions. This is not just a task for feminist and liberationist scholars in religion, but also for all those seeking transformative practices of imagination and vision that are able to articulate radical democratic visions inspired by the sacred scriptures and traditions of the world religions. Congress of Women seeks to make this argument in 4 chapters. The first chapter discusses power as kyriarchal power, as well as how the scriptural power of the word still impacts the life of women around the globe. The second chapter explores the question of diversity in critical discussion with the new feminism, the feminine genius, or emphasized femininity, concepts constructed in terms of hypermasculinity and kyriarchal power. This chapter critically analyzes 2 Christian essentialist gender identity constructs of woman and the feminine, and the ways in which they function to co-opt and exclude women at one and the same time. The third chapter seeks for a theoretical and spiritual Christian vision that enable us to question, resist, and change kyriarchal relations of global domination. As one such utopian imaginary, I propose the notion of the ecclesia or citizen assembly of women, newly conceptualized because it sounded for many too Christian, as I newly conceptualized it as part of the Radical Democratic Congress of the Cosmopolis, of God's different world. God's different cosmopolis is envisioned here as the alternative imaginative space to the global village created by capitalist neoliberalism. In sum, the argument of all three chapters foregrounds the analytic concept of kyriarchy and its alternative, the cosmopolis, for analyzing and re-envisioning the kind of power legitimated by religions and sacred scriptures. The fourth and final chapter is not a conclusion, but a beginning, a dialogue of young feminist thinkers who will define future feminist theologies or studies in religion, and hopefully will enact feminist transformations in different spaces and locations. This roundtable metalogue situates the book's argument in conversation with emergent feminist theoretical voices. This last chapter moves from feminist theory in an authorial mode to dialogical experiences and practices expressed by different voices and perspectives. I hope that the conversation we have started in this Feminist Theories and Theology seminar will be continued not only by readers of Congress of Women, but also by the contributors to the new FSR book series on feminist studies in religion that it inaugurates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have the procedure of these book events is to kind of open the book by discussants, 2 or 3 people who thought about it, read about the issues. None of them are responsible to give kind of a book review, but rather to raise issues of interest and importance. So I'll introduce them briefly, turn it over to them, and then Elizabeth will have a chance to respond to them if she wishes. So Kelsey Morrison Atkins is a third-year THD student in New Testament and Early Christian Studies. Her primary focus of research, as you already heard, is dress and adornment in antiquity, and as it has here, recently submitted a prospectus for a dissertation, which was approved today, on the rhetoric of dress and adornment and the construction of identity in early Christianity. She also, as you see with the book going around, she's a contributor to the book, has a section in the book called Telling Histories, Feminist Theory and Theology as a Practice of History Writing and World Making. So you can check that out as the book comes around. Our second respondent will be Nancy Pineda-Madrid from Boston College. We didn't quite, I guess we didn't overlap there, but I was there when you came and I left campus, but I consider you like a neighbor, so welcome, welcome from Boston College. Nancy Pineda-Madrid is Associate Professor of Theology and Latino-Latina Ministry at Boston College. She holds a PhD in Systematic and Philosophical Theology from the Graduate Theological Union, and her MDiv is from Seattle University. She works at the intersection of systematic theology and practical theology, and her specializations include Latino-Latina theology, feminist reconstructions of redemption, salvation, and United States North American pragmatism and religious thought. Among some of her recent publications is the book Suffering and Salvation in Ciudad Juarez? Ciudad Juarez. They didn't pay me for my Spanish. 2011. And then she co-edited a book, Hope, Promise, Possibility, and Fulfillment. And recent articles include Feminicide and the Reinvention of Religious Practices, and Latina Theology in the Liberation Theologies in the United States volume. And our third respondent, Melanie Johnson de Buffer. I've said I could pronounce it like I'm from New Jersey since I'm from Staten Island, so I can do that. Melanie comes to us from Drew University, where she is Professor of New Testament and Early Christianity and Associate Dean of the Theological School. And she also is in the Graduate Division of Religion. She holds her master's degree and doctorate here at Harvard Divinity School, welcome back, and is ordained in the American Baptist Churches. Her scholarship focuses on the traditions of earliest Christianities, the historical Jesus, the Q source Pauline communities in the context of the Roman Empire, with interest in ethics and the practices of historiography and contemporary reconstructions of Christian origins. She is currently working on a book that draws on theories of space and place, post-colonial and feminist thought, and material culture to think about how Paul's letters, read spatially, map out a complex and contested emergence of the material and discursive space that was Christian in the early centuries. Her books include Mary Magdalene Understood and Jesus Among Her Children, Q, Eschatology, and the Construction of Christian Origins. She is the co-editor of the Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion, and she also co-edited Walk in the Ways of Wisdom, which was a Festschrift for Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza in 2003. So we have three wonderful discussants for the book, and I believe we begin with the bold youngest person, Kelsey. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thanks. Before I begin, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what an honor it is to share the stage, so to speak, with a couple of my intellectual heroines, Professor Nancy Pineda-Madrid and Dean Melanie Johnson de Beaufry. For this honor and for this important volume, I want to thank my esteemed advisor, Professor Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza. I'm delighted to be here to share a bit of my experience as a student contributor to Congress of Women, so without further ado. Preparing for my remarks today, I reread this volume as if with new eyes. This manuscript and the Feminist Theory and Theology seminar itself emerged in a very, very different political moment. Even as the book was ushered into the final stages of publication just a few short months ago, I could not have imagined how eerily prophetic the contents of this volume would be. In Congress of Women, Schussler-Fiorenza maps the religious discourses shaping neoliberal globalization and argues for the critical importance of alliances between feminist theory, theology, and grassroots movements for change. This book also lays out the ties between neoliberalism and conservative religious movements, promoting an essentialized notion of femininity that bolsters white supremacy and pits middle and upper class white women over against women of color, lower class women, and majority world women. Schussler-Fiorenza writes, quote, "The anti-feminist religious right seeks to strengthen hierarchical capitalist power by resorting to essentialist scriptural or philosophical arguments and by organizing upper and middle class white women against poor women's exercise of their citizen rights in society and in church," end quote. Reading this post-election, I can't help but think to the shocking 53% of white women who voted for Trump and the relative lack of attention paid by analysts to the intermingling of religious discourses with racism, colonialism, and capitalism that led so many white women to cast their votes for an unabashedly misogynist candidate. ESF notes importantly that a strictly gender-based analysis is unable to account for the structures of power that led to this outcome, in which the majority of white women voted to perpetuate the oppression of the doubly and triply marginalized. While I suspect that many of us in this room might aspire to have our books described as prophetic, in the current political moment of rife misogyny and xenophobia, such an ascription might be considered rather cold comfort. Nevertheless, Schussler-Fiorenza's aim in Congress of Women is not merely diagnostic or even solely deconstructive. Rather, she consistently underscores that feminist theory and theology must be both deconstructive and reconstructive in order to bring about critical feminist solidarity in context of very real social, political, and religious struggles around the globe. She writes, quote, "A critical feminist political theology of liberation, therefore, has not only the deconstructive task of denaturalizing hegemonic hierarchical gender relations, but also the reconstructive task of envisioning a different world, society, and religious community free from domination. Such a feminist world construction that seeks to articulate alternatives to hierarchical relations of domination has been partially realized in history in and through emancipatory radical democratic movements," end quote. My remarks today focus primarily on the constructive work of building alternative communal spaces, imagining the concluding student roundtable, metalogue, and the Feminist Theory and Theology seminar as an instantiation in miniature of Schussler-Fiorenza's notion of the Ecclesia Cosmopolis of women. Speaking from my experience as a student contributor to Congress of Women, I want to suggest that the concluding roundtable metalogue represents a microcosmopolis of women, if you'll pardon the compounding of Greek suffixes. I am a student of the New Testament, after all, in which our voices and critical insights intermingle the religious, the social, and the political. Seminar as site of resistance, education as activism, publication as feminist praxis. What a set of propositions. In Chapter 3, toward the ecclesia and cosmopolis of women, Schussler-Fiorenza describes the ecclesia cosmopolis of women as a radical feminist political imaginary invested in a transnational perspective on issues of justice, an attention to the intertwining of religious and social issues, in the creation or reshaping of institutions to allow diversely situated individuals to debate with and learn from one another. Schussler-Fiorenza writes, quote, "This feminist space is one where the so-called secular and religious women's movements can be conceptualized not as opposites or never meeting parallels, but as a radical democratic, spiritual decolonizing space and feminist public, as a congress of diverse women's groups and feminist movements working together for change and transformation in both society and religion," end quote. So let me begin by providing some background on the Feminist Theory and Theology seminar, as well as the process of formulating and publishing the student contributions. The seminar took place in the fall of 2014 and brought together 9 students at various stages of their programs from HDS, BU, and BC. In the first half of the semester, we read and discussed this manuscript together, and in the second half of the semester, we each had the opportunity to share our research projects and to get feedback from one another on how to develop our ideas further. In his roundtable reflection, Riker Benavides, currently a PhD student in biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins, if that gives you any sense of the breadth of interest represented in this small seminar, describes his experience of our conversations thus, quote, "Throughout the semester, I learned that the bringing together of diverse and even contradictory viewpoints is precisely what is necessary to destabilize the hierarchical regime," unquote. Rereading Riker's reflections as well as my own, I'm reminded that our conversations, while sometimes tense, especially for a patented Midwesterner, were always respectful and productive and took my own thinking in unanticipated directions. Such a space for collective thinking and productive tension exemplifies, to my mind, the ecclesia of women as, quote, "a friendship community of struggle that signifies not only fullness of being, all-encompassing inclusivity, but also dynamic multiplicity and the convergence of many voices," end quote. What was striking to me as a participant in the seminar, and what is striking to me now as I reread the metalog, is the extent to which our research projects and practical investments are not pursued in isolation, but even in print, it is possible to trace the conversations and debates with one another that informed and shaped our work. To name just one example, Ashley Unruh notes how her project, which focused on how the analytical lens of kyriarchy can push back on the oversimplification of sex work in legal and public discourse, was shaped by Melanie Stanford's proposal for a practical curriculum in feminist theology. In keeping with the aim of the Cosmopolis of Women to create space for feminist conversation and debate, the Roundtable Metalog therefore functions not as a conclusion to Congress of Women, but as an extension to the theoretical work of the volume. Each of the contributions reflects upon the experiences of the seminar itself and records how we applied the key insights of the book to our own research projects, refracting feminist theory and theology through our own political, social, and religious investments. In the last few minutes, then, I would like to draw attention to how the individual student contributions to the Roundtable Metalog function on 2 levels, both responding to the larger claims of the book itself and providing a kind of model for how this volume might be engaged by future communities of readers. While I can't possibly do justice to the moving reflections and critical insights of my colleagues, I will note here some of the questions and visions that their essays raised for me in both engaging and extending the theoretical work of the book. First, Heather McCletchy-Leader opens the metalog by reflecting upon how this book and the seminar helped to, quote, "define her feminist." Her contribution asks us as readers to consider how to develop and sustain the multiplicity and diversity of feminism in the face of widespread stereotyping of feminism as man-hating, antagonistic monolith. See, I can't even get it out. On the other side of this, Heather's response also implicitly raises important questions about the commodification of feminism as a brand that Bell Hooks and Andy Zeisler have recently pushed back against. As an aside, and maybe also a confession, one of these conversations that pushed my thinking was on the implications of holding up Beyonce and Taylor Swift as feminist icons. Monica Ray, in her contribution, highlights the ways in which her own feminist commitments were shaped by encounters with the conservative Christian gospel of femininity that promoted full-time, devoted motherhood as the highest good, and how these discourses cast her Peruvian mother, working 2 jobs to make ends meet for her children, as a failure. Monica's response thus narrates firsthand the ways in which religious discourses are shot through with structures of power based on race, class, and status. Building upon Schussler-Fiorenza's understanding of the importance of feminist consciousness raising within religious communities, Melody Stanford considers how we might develop practical frameworks for educating parishioners on the injustices enacted in the name of the free market. She focuses in particular on the devastating environmental and human rights violations of global neoliberalism, in which water is seen as a commodity and not as a basic human right. Ashley Unruh likewise seeks to take the analytical frameworks provided in Congress of Women to develop a transformative vision of justice for sex workers and advocates. Elise Raby and Riker Benavides bring theory and theology to questions of embodiment, asking how an intersectional lens applied to Christology and incarnation provides an alternative to conflations of Christ with masculinity, so often used to limit women's religious authority and to uphold existing structures of power. Yeji Kim considers the complexity of cross-cultural theorizing as she applies a curiarchal analytic to her community, to women's participation and leadership in her own community of faith, First Korean Church in Cambridge. Finally, in my concluding reflection, I ask about the implications of history, both in how we might engage in a justice-oriented retelling of the past for the present in my own discipline, and in considering the narratives that we use to tell the history of feminism. How might this metalogue be conceived as a kind of feminist storytelling? How do each of these contributions individually and together constitute a kind of narrative that unfolds past and present feminist work? It's perhaps interesting to think about the roundtable metalogue as a kind of example encoded within the text for how future communities of readers might engage with Congress of Women. What would it mean to engage with feminist theory in community rather than in scholarly isolation? What would be the effect of starting with the roundtable metalogue and then moving to the main text of Congress of Women? As this book shifts conventions of scholarly publishing, does it also shift conventions of scholarly reading? If so, what are the implications of this for democratic modes of feminist reading, thinking, of acting up or acting out? Building and reframing existing institutions to provide space for the flourishing of feminist work is central to the alternative imaginary of the ecclesia cosmopolis of women. Creating spaces for students to publish their insights, in which the scholar-author is one among a multiplicity of voices, is one important model of this cross-generational feminist activism, and I am very grateful to have been a part of such a dynamic and invested community. My hope is that this metalogue might be seen by the reader as a model for the ties that might and should be formed between feminists and religion and social movements for change that are critical in all political contexts, but perhaps especially and urgently in this one.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It's always a joy to be back. I think I met you, Elizabeth, for the first time actually in this room about 11 years ago. I remember exactly when we met, and it was at a lecture like this one. So it's a joy and a great honor to be here. And I'm very grateful to you for encouraging me and inviting me to provide a response. So thank you. And thank you for calling our attention to the global economic cosmopolitanism, also known as neoliberal capitalism, and the ways it demands that we reimagine our theological project if we are to offer any credible response to what's going on in the world today. Indeed, today we need to become critically aware that we write theology in the belly of the beast, in the time of Trump. As you noted, we live in a time of war against woman, now more than ever. I title my response today, Traversing Along Theological Borderlands. I do so because I spent the first 25 years of my life along the US-Mexican border, and your book took me very quickly back to that place. I was raised in El Paso, Texas, and often spent time in Ciudad Juarez. I chose traversing along because I believe you are inviting us to travel across and back and across again, across theological borderlands. You describe your task as follows, and I quote, "In my view, feminist emancipatory theories and theologies have a double task. On the one hand, they have to name, question, transcend, and theorize relations of domination and dehumanization. On the other, they should create spaces and opportunities for very different women to move across religious and social boundaries in order to encounter one another, to join in solidarity with one another, and to harness their power of change. Social and religious liberation movements thus empower critical feminist theories and theologies, close quote. So I'm going to make a couple of points. First, I want to express my appreciation, Elizabeth, that you are inviting us to think at the intersection of the theological and the political, and to do so in a transnational key. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this today. I was thinking as I was writing this, it's even more important today than it was when you were writing this book, what you have done. It's hard to overstate its importance. Shortly, I will turn to one example of what this means on the southern border. While your work has always foregrounded the political, in this book, the political is framed a bit differently. Here you turn our attention to the intersection of feminist critical theology and religion and critical political theory. So for me, that's while all your work has been political, there's a reframing here that I find very enlightening, and particularly the fact that it's being done in terms of a transnational context. This is echoed in your constant traversing at the intersection of the ecclesia of women and a cosmopolis of women, calling us to consider what it means to be citizens of the world. I turn to the US-Mexican border as an example of where your work directs our attention. As we know, the emergence and escalation of violence against women does not erupt without cause. Economic power in this region, which is the result of neoliberal economics, has brought about in Mexico the disarticulation of the state and the disarticulation of justice. The power brokers of neoliberal economics have reorganized political power so that it carries a minimal risk to global market economics. Organized crime has taken advantage of the globalized economic world, further advancing the denationalization of Mexico and forging a transnational unity between Mexico and the United States. It quite effectively manipulates political power on both sides of the border so as to advance its own particular interests in a globalized world economy. This reorganization has increasingly generated the disposability of labor, particularly female labor. Women have become viewed socially as low-valued individuals, a term coined by Saskia Sassen, or as ciudadanas X, of a denationalized region. And this is a term, Ciudadanas X, that's been used by Alicia Schmidt Camacho. This term, Ciudadanas X, recognizes the absence of state and national power to act on behalf of civil society. The crucifixion of women in this region, in the border region, not only expresses itself bodily, but also is justified through the dissemination of the myth of mujeres desechables, the ways in which global capitalism treats and disposes of women as natural and inevitable. Myth is, of course, a foundational story or premise that is used to rationalize and justify making a situation appear as given and as natural. To identify and name this operative myth of disposability is to take a first step towards dismantling of this mindset. According to Melissa Wright, and I quote, "The myth of the disposable third world woman revolves around the trials and tribulations of its central protagonist, a young woman from a third world locale, who, through the passage of time, comes to personify the meaning of human disposability. Someone who eventually evolves into a state of worthlessness. The myth explains that this waiting process occurs within the factories that employ her, as she, within a relatively short period of time and at a young age, loses the physical and mental faculties for which she was initially employed, until she is worth no more than the cost of her dismissal and substitute. In other words, over time, this woman turns into a form of industrial waste, at which point she is discarded and replaced. The myth explains this unlucky fate as a factual outcome of natural and cultural processes that are immune to external tampering. In short, there is nothing, says the myth, that can be done to save its unfortunate protagonist from her sad destiny. Close quote. One of the paradoxes present is that just as the third world woman is transformed to personify human disposability, a commodity to be used and discarded, she is simultaneously producing products of value in the market. And so I'm raising this because I think Elizabeth's work for me draws my attention directly to this kind of thinking. And drawing again on Wright, she names this disposability myth in relation to global factory work. In this case, the maquilas of Ciudad Juárez. It applies as well to women who suffer a slavery unto death in sexual trafficking and to women who are victims of feminicide, the mass assassination of women, which is a growing phenomenon certainly in Juárez as well as other parts of the globe. Who are victims of feminicide, of whose death the state overlooks. This myth, like many such narratives, is advanced to obscure the political relationships that have formed and to foreclose any discussions of politics, attempting to make the situation of the third world woman appear to be natural, to make this situation appear to be preordained, fait accompli, places it beyond any political purview and critique. Arguably, the condition of dispossession, in Judith Butler's thinking, rightly names what is transpiring for third world women. It is precisely what happens when populations lose their land, their citizenship, their means of livelihood, and become subject to military and legal violence. In theological language, it is the making of a crucified people at the hands of the state beholden to economic power brokers. And you're, I think, calling our attention exactly to this kind of phenomena. Your book calls for a much closer collaboration between scholars and ministers or religious leaders and community builders. And there are crosses, as many of us know, painted a bold pink color in Ciudad Juárez, and they're used to protest the violence there. So how are we to interpret the use of the cross in these public practices of protest? Might this use of the cross call us to consider anew the cross in relation to the sacredness of female bodies? And accordingly, might this use of the cross call into question interpretations which serve to subordinate women, particularly poor women of color? Through the pink crosses protesting violence against women, particularly the violence of feminicide, we are invited to remake our humanity, to see the assassination of women for what it is, and to join the effort to bring the crucified down from the cross. You posit that feminist liberation theologies and studies in religion have made several contributions but have neglected to create educational community spaces for feminist theological knowledge production, or have exchanges on the grassroots and global levels that could address this contradiction in women's identity formation. Feminists in religion, therefore, have to develop their work not just in terms of knowledge production, but also as a means of communal conscientization. A close quote. Throughout your work, you underscore the import of studies of symbolic universes and religious practices. And so I was highlighting the use of these pink crosses because one question that I have for our conversation is how might attention to the non-rational dimension of our knowing play a more viable role in the transformation of curiarchal societies and religion? And I ask this because in many ways, we often function at we're informed by a symbolic level that we're not always critically aware of. And so to get at and engage with social imaginaries at a non-rational level, it's not to say that they're irrational, but the non-rational level, I think, is utterly important for dismantling the kind of oppression that we're talking about. So my second point, I appreciate that in this book, you call us to forge new emancipatory spaces. You call on us to, and I quote, create spaces and opportunities for the very different women to move across religious and social boundaries in order to encounter one another, to join in solidarity with one another, and to harness their power of change, close quote. You speak of ecclesia of women and the cosmopolis of women using varied meanings that these terms connote. So ecclesia connoting both the democratic assembly of full citizens and the religious community. Cosmopolis, an invitation for us to consider what it means to be citizens of the world. These terms have both a literal and material meanings, as well as metaphorical and ideal meanings. The imaginative work you call for, I hold, cannot be prophetic feminist critical work if we do not journey to the borderlands. In my usage, the borderlands carries both material and metaphorical meanings. Here I'm informed by your work as well as the work of Walter Mignolo. His book, Local Histories and Global Designs, Colonialities, Subaltern Knowledges, and Border Thinking. In this text, he argues that colonial modernities or subaltern modernities, that is, a period expanding from the late 15th century to the current stage of globalization, have built a frame and a conception of knowledge based on the distinction between epistemology and hermeneutics, and by so doing have subalternized other kinds of knowledge. That long process of subalternization of knowledge is being radically transformed by new forms of knowledge in which what has been subalternized and considered interesting only as object of study becomes articulated as new loci of enunciation, close quote. And so what he's arguing here is for a border gnosis, a border gnosis. The border is the place to transcend binaries, to create something new. It can be an emancipatory space created by a retelling of religious stories in a new key. For example, your telling of the empty tomb story. This emancipatory space discloses the injustice furthered by those in power. The border continually fosters a space of resistance and non-acceptance of the established unjust order. It creates a subversion of the fatality of dependency. Along the border, meaning is no longer confined to the given facts of the situation. Meaning emerges from a larger context, from both sides of the border. The cosmopolis of women, I contend, invites transformation because it is necessarily located in the terrain of the borderlands. This is the space to unleash political and theological imaginaries. It is a wilderness where visions emerge. And yet, another meaning of borderland, which I want to suggest. Well, not amply explored theologically, Latin American literature is known for its magical realism. And here I'm thinking of Isabel Allende's House of Spirit, for example, and there are many, many, many examples. And magical realism also appears in other places. For example, in Chicano studies, if you look at Aztlán and the history of Aztlán and what Aztlán means, it's the same kind of an idea, a space and a land where the spiritual and the material come together. So this magical realism takes us to the nexus between the real and the beyond. Gloria Anzaldúa, in her Borderlands La Frontera, writes, and I quote, "The U.S.-Mexican border es una herida abierta, where the third world grates against the first and bleeds. And before a scab forms, it hemorrhages again, the lifeblood of two worlds merging to form a third country, a border country. Borders are set up to define the places that are safe and unsafe, to distinguish us from them. A border is a dividing line, a narrow strip along a steep edge. A borderland is a vague and undetermined place created by the emotional residue of an unnatural boundary. It is in a constant state of transition. The prohibited and forbidden are its inhabitants," close quote. And I think that's where you're taking us, is precisely there, to these kinds of places. You have invited us to the borderlands, calling for a careful, and I quote, analyzing and reframing the workings of power in the religious discourses of the past and those of the present, as well as by constructing an imaginative space for articulating an alternative, radical, egalitarian, discursive imagination, close quote. You state that we need to take account of both the particular articulations, geographical and identity-centered, as well as commonality in neoliberal empire that shapes our present cultural, political, religious situations around the globe. I read this as an invitation to the borderlands, both theologically and politically. So my question is how might attention to the borderlands serve as a hermeneutical key for opening up imaginative space further? Thank you for encouraging us to traverse along the theological borderlands. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to thank Professor Clooney and Elizabeth Joseph-Fiorenza for this invitation to be part of this great event. The arrival of this book is a thing to celebrate, and having been one of the co-editors of the series, I feel it very personally. And so I'm very happy to celebrate the arrival of this book, as well as to be in this space here at HDS, where more years ago than I would like to admit, I was welcomed as an incoming MDiv student by Dean Ron Thiemann, and he said to a whole bunch of nervous students who were worried if they were the admissions mistake that Harvard doesn't make mistakes. I also want to thank Elizabeth Joseph-Fiorenza for this incisive little book and for our many years of scholarly collaboration and friendship. It means a great deal to me to be here today. So I want to talk about Congress of Women here, and I'm glad I went third because I'd like to open it up for you to contemplate this idea of spaces of possibilities, because I think that that's one of the most crucial aspects of this rich book that resonated with me from three particular places. First, in terms of the political and theological landscape that we find ourselves in today, as opposed to when this book first began its journey to publication well before the Donald. So landscape. Second, from the perspective of my faculty and now relatively new role as academic dean at the theological school. A theological school of Drew University, one affiliated with a formerly mainline, now sidelined denomination, Protestant denomination in the United States. Finally, from the angle of my role as one of the editors of the new series of FSR books, which can now boast, of course, this book as its inaugural publication. All in all, I like to open up this conversation to talk about this concept of really, as I said, utopian or spaces of possibilities from this leading scholar of feminist studies in religion and theology. My goal is to contribute really to our ongoing work to struggle together for a more just world. The themes in Congress should be familiar to those of us who know Elizabeth's work. Kyriarchy, Ecclesia of Women, and a critical feminist theoretical framework for both analysis of structures of domination and the cultivation of emancipatory discourses, practices, and ways of knowing and living. These things remain at the center of Elizabeth's work. And here, particular attention is paid to the problem of certain divides, such as the ways that feminist political work remains cleft by false distinctions between the secular and the religious, and as well as between the religious and the political. She does not seek to merely acknowledge the presence of the religious in political spheres, and that is a crucial insight. She rather seeks to claim religion and theology as a space for politics, thoroughly as a space for politics. Both repressive politics and emancipatory politics. And here she does not just mean the political as in power struggles, right? But she actually means the space of democratics, that is, democratic political life, of citizenship, of the forming of social relationships, and the negotiation of living together in the world, in societies, in geographies, in places. Thus, the imaginary of the Congress of Women does not actually replace the ecclesia of women simply as a suitable translation of the concept into secular or political spaces. It rather refracts the feminist theopolitical imaginary of ecclesia of women to bring the political into sharper focus, but without evacuating theology and religion as a space for feminist politics, for feminist citizenship, and for feminist democratics, or democratics more broadly, which form, as she says, the horizon of feminist struggles in both religion and society at large. And as you've heard from my colleagues from everywhere from the classroom, right, to the globe, right, to the transnational globe, and everywhere in between. What is so challenging and compelling about this move in the current landscape, for me, is the ways that Congress, as a site of politics, has today become a grotesque carnival of incompetent gamesmanship and political ideological posturing. This raises questions for me that I'm not posing to Elizabeth, but that I'm moving from Elizabeth to you. And that is, it raises questions for me about the idea of both Congress in the US and Congress as a political imaginary, as a space for citizen decision-making. Where are the spaces of citizenship today that from which we may imagine alternatives? What happens to our imagining of alternative or contrapuntal spaces if the base concepts, even the base places, become so terribly unconvincing or credible as a space for democracy? What kinds of liberation, emancipation, and alternative places of freedom are we seeking and theorizing when the Freedom Caucus is hell-bent on obliterating any collective forms of civic bond beyond the free movement of commerce and the performance of politics as spectacles of allegiance? How do we constitute alternative spaces of full rights, freedom, decision-making when the dominant spaces of citizenship, law, and rights seem to be collapsing from within? And all of these using co-opted rhetoric of freedom and self-determination. Free to be very rich and very poor. Free to be well and sick. Free to be me, but not free to be you. A feminist partner in crime is near at hand. In her popular conservative book, Freedom Feminism, Christina Hoff Sommers does for conservatism and libertarianism what New Feminism and the True Woman movement, as discussed in Congress of Women, does for Catholic and Protestant curiarchal religion. Sommers deploys freedom to drive a wedge into feminist political solidarity in the struggle for equality and justice by claiming that egalitarian feminism has had its day. And it has made its important contributions, but it is now denying the freedom of women today. To quote the book, freedom feminists can be liberal, conservative, or libertarian, Sommers says. They can differ over abortion, the wage gap, and the role of government in the lives of women. They can strike balances between balance and career, between family and career. What they must share is respect for considered differences of opinion and choice, insistence that debate and scholarship be reasoned, commitment to improving the lives of women. This is still Sommers. Recognition that the sexes are equal but different, and devotion to Enlightenment democratic principles. Can you see the confusing mix of rhetoric that is so clear here? She adds that today's feminist movement is a hostile environment for faith-based, family-centered conservative women. This is a theological discourse, not just a political discourse. And this is why books like Elizabeth's are so crucial for us to be able to read the signs of the times. And not only the signs of the times, not only the language of the times, but the physical places of the times. What is happening in place, not just in the discursive space, right? In the physical spaces of our world today. This framework is so crucial for us to be able to read. This is deceptive talk she uses. And it is the fundamental basis, sorry, lost my place. I'm preaching a little bit. Her deceptive talk, which she uses freedom as the fundamental basis of collaboration and working for progress, are thoroughly neoliberal and based on the fundamental rights of differences of opinion and choice. If the very theories of government that undergird notions of citizenship and decision-making are dissolving in favor of individualist opinion and choice, what does it mean to struggle for women's full democratic citizenship and decision-making? Where do we do that? Of course, everywhere, but really, I mean it, where do we do it? What kind of alternative political spaces should we be cultivating? And as an alternative to what? For example, maybe Congress of Women should be materialized by having women retake the Congress. And I mean women with a slash, right? Which is a much bigger political project. Takes a lot more investment and a lot more movement behind it. Perhaps an answer and a challenge to these kinds of questions come in Elizabeth's discussion of earlier feminist local spaces, of theological and political conscientization, apart from church hierarchies and the disciplining practices of the academy. This question is actually very acute for me today from the perspective of the declining role of theological education as an institution for shaping church and society. Drew has a robust, if also somewhat recent, history of educating theologians, church leaders, and scholars of religion within a deeply liberationist and eco-feminist epistemological and political framework. We find ourselves in the business, and I do mean business, however, of surviving as an institution so that we can continue as in our mission to empower courageous leaders for the transformation of the world. Or, as Elizabeth said, to continue to cultivate possibilities for a radical democratic society and religion. But I have to say that the headwind of the unbridled free market in higher education and theological education from where I sit is very strong. Although I have been using the concept of struggle for most of my scholarly career, it has taken on a new affective power for me of late, as I contemplate the possibility that whatever spaces of possibility are being made anew in this landscape, and they must be made, they are not spaces where I live and work. This draws my attention to both the dinner church that reestablishes local theologizing and community in new patterns, and the way that the Moral Monday folks in North Carolina started holding church in the State House, singing hymns and preaching democracy. When you look around the landscape in the world today, where are the schools of democracy? Not where are the schools. Where are the schools of democracy in the world today? I also am encouraged by the resurgence of citizens in local town meetings and council halls, insisting on the integrity of their democracy and their rights to be heard and well represented, even as, again, the spectacle of their being silenced or discouraged from acting up as citizens. This grassroots energy may materialize versions of the Congress of Women that Elizabeth calls us to imagine and co-create. But as she also activates the cosmopolis of women, she reminds us that the horizon of the local or the small or the unconnected is not sufficient. So if we are seeing the reemergence of these small spaces of democracy, these small opportunities for engaging in and materializing the Congress of Women, still we have to have the world on our minds at the same time. How do we do that? As the forces of global neoliberalism seek to sweep aside familiar structures of law, citizenship, democratic decision-making, it is again difficult to say where alternative planetary-wide spaces of cultivating, theorizing, and practicing democratics might actually materialize. And those of us who were not born as cyborgs struggle sometimes to understand virtuality, right? Or the ephemerality of those kinds of spaces that connect us, right, on the military infrastructure that has now connected the world in corporate globalization. Flash mobs and swarms are different metaphors than congresses and policies. What does that mean? How do we think about the space of citizenship, the space of decision-making, if we are not in the decision-making spaces? What does it look like? And also if they're changing all the time. What does it mean to change while moving? To change the world while moving. So, as has ever been the case in feminist politics, we shouldn't aspire, of course, to pure places. The space of hope is always a bit of a dismal space as well, right? That is, it's nailing the flag to the mast in a time of despair. And Elizabeth's work has always been profoundly hopeful, profoundly committed to that possibility of feminist work in the world. No more have I felt that more recently than in the publication of this little book, which is the first in our series. I'll hold up the advertisement of feminist, the FSR book series. But I want to mention as part of this, and in closing, as part of the publication of this book, is in the process of finding a feminist space in which we could, in some ways, step out of the constraints of not having editorial control over what would be published. We wanted to have a space of our own editorially, and also to step out of the constraints of pricing that make it inaccessible, make books inaccessible to the larger populations beyond the academy or beyond folks who have devices, right? One thing we discovered is that access is actually easier with a book, because you don't have to have technology to have it. You do have to get past the price, but then if someone gives it to you, right, you don't have to have technology. You can give it away if it's a book. But if it's a PDF or an e-file, that's harder, right? So what we discovered in this whole process, however, also with trying to step into new ways of creating access to spreading feminist knowledge and creating feminist knowledge, is that, again, we were in some ways newly captive to our labor being undervalued and to having to find support constantly to work to self-publish, right, because of the way the structures of publishing. That is, we are always constantly wanting to work outside the systems while always working within the systems. Even if we imagine ourselves alternatively, we're still working within. And therefore, we have a constant state of constraint as well as possibility. So that's why this book for me is a hope and a challenge. It dares us in a lot of ways to hope and to keep hoping in very concrete material ways, to keep working for the materialization of the Congress of Women in all kinds of spaces and places. And it has done that for me, as Elizabeth's work has done for me again and again. And so in that sense, I want to end with the concept of utopia, which is very much related to the concept of hope, with a poem that really gives you the feeling of why this matters. It's a poem by Eduardo Galeano. Utopia is on the horizon. When I walk 2 steps, it takes 2 steps back. When I walk 10 steps, it is 10 steps farther away. What is utopia for? Let me reframe that. What is hope for? What is the ecclesia of women for? What is the dream of the Basileia of God for? I'm paraphrasing the poem. What is utopia for? It is for this, just to get us walking together. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much to our three discussants for raising so many excellent points. So the floor is open, and you can take your own questions, and anyone can jump in. I think usually that works pretty well. Who would like to open things up?
I will open it. I want to thank everybody for your contributions and for the issues you highlighted. And I think let's try to move into them. To start with Kelby, how would you see the future of feminist work after listening to Melanie? Nancy.
Can I put that question out? Because I feel like
You can do what
no.
you want.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what y'all think, because I think I hopefully offered a kind of sense of that in my remarks. But if you all want to say something to give me a minute to think about this incredibly difficult question, I would appreciate it.
If you need some time to think about it, let me ask a question for Nancy. Nancy, if we are in a global situation where borders are no longer borders, how can we then, the imagination of the borderlands, rescue for those who haven't lived in the borderlands? Or in other words, if the situation in the States becomes every day more and more like that in Mexico, the borderland is no longer border because the political and the economic and all situations becoming, in terms of neoliberalism, global. So how can one work with the imagination of the borderlands, which we have such a rich literature, if the borders are no longer borders?
That's a great question. I think one of the challenges we find, borders are both places where you see a clash, and there is the devolution and all kinds of evil practices that emerge along the border. And there are also places where there's a breaking in, and you start to see organizing across borders that is hopeful and grace-filled. So I think there are places where you see the clash of both of those realities going on. What I think is happening in our world more and more, the disintegration that you're talking about, I think it's a disintegration with regard to economics. But I think there is a militarization and a violence and a rigidity around the border with regard to the movement of peoples. And so there's that has to do a lot with the evil that is escalating along the border. But I also see the only hope is the transnational, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited about your work, because we need a whole different frame of thinking, and we have to think outside of our national boundaries. And so while not all of us necessarily have the experience of the border or haven't necessarily lived on the border, we've got to push ourselves to be thinking on a whole different scale. And that's where I find a grace that the transnational in what you've done is put on the map much more strongly through your work. and the work of many others, I think too, that we're moving in that direction. I don't know if that, I mean, those are some initial thoughts to what you're raising.
Kathy, are you ready?
Well, I guess what comes to mind immediately is thinking a little bit about what Melanie was saying about sort of my generation of human cyborgs and the kind of ephemeral spaces for collective organizing on things like Facebook and Twitter. And I think we're seeing pretty clearly the dark side of the Twitterverse at present. But I think that we might imagine the sort of feminism of the future is to take charge of those virtual spaces, I guess. In some ways, like what we're doing with the Feminist Studies and Religion Forum, is kind of creating spaces for feminist transnational networking that are alternatives, but also kind of interwoven with these sort of larger social networks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not the only one who asks questions.
Melanie gets off the hook?
Join the
Yes, I get off the hook.
I mean, I agree with Melanie says, but you still have left me with the question, should I drop Congress of Women, because Congress, as we experience it, no longer is working or is communicating something. It's just the opposite of what I'm trying to intend. But I mean, and Congress became, I was chosen because I have for years used ecclesia. But then I have been told again and again, and rightfully so, that ecclesia is not just a Greek term, but it's a very religious, Christian, Catholic term.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking for another image, name. And so in Poland, there was 2 or 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, they started the Congress of Women, where, and they had it every year. Mm-hmm. And so where women from all different professions, different jobs, different areas came together in a Congress. And so that's really what gave me the idea, as thinking that would maybe a potent notion to develop.
Yeah, and I actually would, I mean, what was so interesting for me reading it this time around was that the concept of the utopian requires that paradoxical, that is, that it is both, you know, the place and not the place, so it has to retain, the utopian has to retain a connection to the world as it is. And so then I was puzzling about the fact that Congress was so not congressional, that what does that do to the utopian imaginary? But actually, I think where I landed is exactly what you talk about in terms of even religious congresses, even ecclesia as the space of democratics, right? Almost like the schools for democracy, means that then the renovation of Congress, the space itself, right, can happen up out of these new practices. But then Congress of Women is not really, it's actually a physical alternative space, not just a utopian, you know, imaginary alternative space. It's actually a get together for democracy school kind of space. And I think that's its utopian energy for me in the current landscape, if that makes sense.
And you merged them, Elizabeth, like in chapter 3, that you bring these two together. They're always talked about in relationship with one another and as distinct. But then in that 3rd chapter, you often write them into a single, as a single idea, which I think is interesting, and it pushes our thinking in ways And I think even with Ecclesia, of course, you've always held together the utopian and the material. I mean, they're both running constantly through your work over the whole course of your all the books you've published. And I think I'm curious now, as you think about this book, would you title it differently today if you were writing it now than you did? I mean, I'm not suggesting that that's what should happen. I'm just asking the question because you're drawing that out. So I'm curious about your own thinking on that.
I mean, I'm curious what's the response, whether or not I get across what I want, what I didn't get across with Ecclesia of Women, namely the political. And the book is about the political frame.
That's right.
And I hope I will get it across. I mean, it would be interesting to have a congresswoman here to discuss and talk it how they would see religious spaces or not.
I was also struck by how many times I thought about the referent when again in the current landscape of theological education and feminist publishing and Congress, if I say, citizen of what, right? A citizenship of what? Our decision making where? Like, I think that I was really struck just by how much I wasn't sure anymore what those references were that were unspoken, which I think really speaks to the moment, which is that there's all kinds of new spaces being made. That's the hopeful side of this, right? Is that there's all kinds.
Okay, I have lost my headset, so I'm gonna stop here just because it's so dense, and it's like got 10 minutes left. I think you can hear me. Can you hear me? I think you can hear me. But I lost my headset. It's somewhere around here. I don't know where it is, but this was good. I'll probably do something more chatty, but my hips hurt and they don't feel good. But we'll do a longer one another time. And I hope that we will get to learn more about these individuals, but in particular, the author that made Kyriarchy, not chiriarchy, we've learned. Okay, all right. Goodbye, everybody. I'm going to go.